Chapter 93, General. Chapter 93. General. The imperial bodyguards swarmed into the Shui's residence and swiftly passed through the veranda to enter within. All the people in the various courtyards were startled awake. The women huddled together in fear as they were herded out of their houses towards an open space in the residence to assemble. The imperial bodyguards had a reputation out there, and in these people's eyes, Shen Zichuan was a man-eating predator. One Shuixiui hurriedly put on his clothes and stepped out. Seeing Shuixiuzhua standing under the eaves too, he could not help but lunge forward and hauled Shuixiuzhua as he said resentfully, "What did you do to bring the imperial bodyguards to us? If you implicate us and get us into trouble, I'll boot you out and have you disowned from the clan." Shuixiuzhua turned his head to look at this savage-looking eldest brother of his, and let him hauled as he liked. With pity and indifference in his eyes, he said, "The whole family gets a share in fame and fortune, but when misfortune befalls, one person alone bears it all. Eldest brother, have no fear. It's still far from your turn to be the head of this clan." Having said that, he pushed Shuixiui away and walked along the steps towards Shen Zichuan. This was the second time Shen Zichuan and Shuixiuzhua met head-on. Shuixiuzhua had not gone to bed yet. He had been in the study handling affairs pertaining to the cases, and had promptly walked out with an azure wide-sleeved robe draped over him. This man had a calm and unhurried aura to him, and his scholarly elegance was not something that could be feigned overnight. He had real capabilities, and this was something Shen Zichuan never denied. "To what I owe the vice-commander's presence in my humble abode at this late hour?" Shuixiuzhua, who was about the same height as Shen Zichuan, stood firm and said to Shen Zichuan, "I should have prepared a simple meal with wine as a show of hospitality and welcomed you much earlier. I've just received the imperial edict. His Majesty orders me to take overall charge of the military provisions case. This is such a major issue, and the imperial bodyguards, not daring to be sloppy, have promptly arrested Wei Huaigu." Shen Zichuan scrutinized the couplets in the main hall and did not look at Shuixiuzhou as he said with nonchalance, "Wei Huaigu has always been on good terms with Assistant Minister Shui. In order for you to avoid suspicions, your residence will have to be searched tonight. I am fully aware that the Court of Judicial Review is assisting the imperial bodyguards with the case, but I am an appointed official of the imperial court. If the imperial bodyguards want to search my residence, you'll need the warrant issued by the Ministry of Justice." Shuixiuzhua looked around the courtyard and saw panic and confusion all around. He said, however, "This case is urgent, and the vice-commander has the prerogative to act first and report later. Uncle Shui, hand the keys to the inner courtyard to the imperial bodyguards as well. Lead the way to whichever area they wish to search." Shen Zichuan inclined his head and said, "You are really something to be on guard even against an impromptu imperial edict issued by His Majesty." Shuixiuzhua smiled. "It's only right that I act with caution when encountering a character like the vice-commander. It's late and chilly out there. If the vice-commander doesn't find it beneath you, would you like to have a cup of tea with me inside? This residence isn't small. By the time the search is done, it would be time for morning court. I'll skip the tea." Shen Zichuan slowly turned around. "I can't afford to ask for tea from prominent clans. So does it mean I'm going to have to return empty-handed again today?" Shuixiuzhua said, "That will have to depend on what the vice-commander is here for. If it is to investigate the case, then it's indeed going to be regrettable. I'm just acquaintances with Wei Huaigu. We aren't connected in any way." Shen Zichuan fell silent. As he stared at Shuixiuzhua, that feeling of being played for a fool indistinctly resurfaced again. After a long while, Qiao Tianya returned to the open ground and shook his head at Shen Zichuan from afar. Shen Zichuan then knew that he had come up empty-handed once again. Shifu and teacher were both not here. "A wily hare has 3 burrows," Shen Zichuan said softly. "Just a fish swimming at the bottom of the cauldron, 3 taking a momentary breather." Shuexiuzhua said in a deferential manner. You only have this one chance with me. Shen Zichuan moved his feet and approached Shuexiuzhua. Where are they? It was a moonless night, with the after-rain dampness and chill pervasive all around. The men and women in the courtyard were all covering their faces and weeping. Shuexiuzhua did not know the details, but fearing Shuexiuzhua would infuriate Shen Zichuan, he hurriedly stepped forth and bowed to Shen Zichuan with his hands clasped before him. With trepidation, he said, Who is your excellency looking for? We are not harboring any fugitives from the military provisions case. All the people in the compound are here. Your excellency, please feel free to interrogate them. We will definitely tell you all we know without holding anything back. Shuexiuzhua said nothing, seeing that he was not willing to reveal his Shifu's whereabouts. He said, I'm looking for wanted criminals of the imperial court. I've heard that there is a batch of prostitutes being kept in Assistant Minister Shue's residence. Is that right? Shuexiuzhua's gaze flickered. Shuexiuzhua immediately butted in and said, Yes, there is. But matters like soliciting and consorting with prostitutes are all impeachable by the Chief Surveillance Bureau. He has been pretty careful in hiding them, so the imperial censors have no awareness of it. Your Excellency, please take a look. These are the children. They are just some little playthings. How could they be wanted criminals of the imperial court? Shen Zichuan noticed the slight change in Shuexiuzhua's expression at Shuexiui's words. He turned his eyes to look at those boys and girls and said, What place is Shangyun Villa? Everyone in there are all wanted criminals implicated in the assassination case. Assistant Minister Shue bought them from Shangyun Villa without so much a word. Why wasn't the Ministry of Justice notified? Shuexiuzhua pushed Shuexiui aside and said, These people all have proof of household registration. Although they are from the brothel, they are all innocent. The vice commander is currently on the military provisions case tonight. It has nothing to do with them, so why keep harping on it? Whether they are innocent or not, we will only find out after they make a trip to the imperial prison. Shen Zichuan looked back and said, Take all these people away. The group of people hugged themselves and cried out loud. Xiao Tianya took the lead and dragged them away. Under Shuexiuzhua's tutelage, those boys had been taught to carry themselves like the younger generation of distinguished clans, so how could they compare to the imperial bodyguards? In no time, their wails worsened. Shuexiui was so frightened that his legs were trembling. Still wanting to mediate and say a few words of appeasement to ease the tension, he even brought out Xiaoqie. Your Excellency. Bracing himself, Shuexiui said with difficulty, Since this matter concerns Li Bei, then why not ask what his lordship thinks. If there's really something wrong, then go ahead and take Shuexiuzhua away. Shuexiuzhua suddenly took a few steps forward to obstruct Xiao Tianya. He bellowed, The imperial bodyguards still have to follow procedures even if you are officially on the case. Vice Commander Shun, you can take my people away, but I want to see the arrest warrant from the Ministry of Justice. Take them away. Shen Zichuan held up his blade to push back against him, forcing Shuexiuzhua to take a step back. He said, Since you want the arrest warrant, then I will give you as many as you want tomorrow morning. Shen Zichuan. Shuexiuzhua abruptly flung his sleeves. I'm going to impeach you for abusing the power of public office to avenge personal grudges. Then go ahead and submit the memorial for impeachment tonight. Shen Zichuan's tone turned frosty. This batch of people is now in my hands. For each day I don't see teacher, I will kill one. Guess how long will it take for me to kill my way to your precious student? Don't you dare. Shuexiuzhua suddenly flew into a rage. Seeing that Xiao Tianya had already dragged them away to the other end where the wails were increasing in intensity, he grabbed Xiao Tianya's arm and said, You people are accessories to crime by willfully arresting innocent commoners. So why investigate? Stop it. If you dare to get in the way again, I'll kill them now. Shen Zichuan partially pressed his blade out of its sheath with his thumb, revealing a glint. Seeing Shen Zichuan made to draw his blade out amidst their dispute, Shueishui could not help but be so seized with terror that he actually fainted from the fright. The surrounding servants all yelled out, "Eldest master," and hurried over to help him up. Shueishui, who was being dragged backward by the imperial bodyguards, watched helplessly as the imperial bodyguards rounded all the students up onto the wagon. Shen Zichuan. Shueishui held on to the arm blocking his way, his composure all but gone. With his eyes reddened, he spat resentfully, "You dare to kill them! You dare to kill them? You tyrant! You aren't worthy of being Mr. Student!" Shen Zichuan flipped atop his horse and left Shueishui's shouts of abuse all behind. The wars in Libei were concentrated in numbers and intensity. Likewise, it was not all quiet and still over at the Bianjuan commandery. Lu Guangbai returned to his camp for a rest. He had not even dismounted when he saw his deputy general hurrying over towards him. He asked, "What's the matter?" The deputy general did not look too good as he whispered, "General, Kudu has dispatched an army inspecting eunuch over. He brought this year's military provisions too." After a moment of silence, Lu Guangbai dismounted, removed his helmet, and lifted the screen to enter the tent. An eunuch was sitting on the raised seat that had been set up inside. He was dressed in a python-patterned robe and wore a yendun hat on his head. Even when he saw Lu Guangbai stepping in, he did not get up to pay his obeisances. Lu Guangbai set aside his long spear and said, "Gong has been rushing the entire journey. Why are you not taking a rest? I'll order the men to tidy up the tent." Ingshi was a recently promoted eunuch. He had backings in the palace, and he knew that his masters had never looked kindly upon the Lu clan of the Bianjuan commandery, so he looked down upon Lu Guangbai too. On hearing him, he smiled and said, "It's desolate and barren here, and all the people here are clumsy fools, so how would they know how to serve others? There's no need for the general to go to such trouble. I have already taken a look around. That tent is so dark and filthy it's not inhabitable. I've gotten men to hurry over to Tsangjuan to buy some timber with the plan to build a separate compound here. I still have to stay here for half a year." Lu Guangbai was not good with words. He knew that the army inspecting eunuchs were always this pretentious, and he could not be bothered to make conversation either. He undid the arm guard, and with the removal of that iron skin, filthy blood dripped onto the ground. On seeing this, Ingshi covered his nose in horror and exclaimed, "How did it fester to such an extent?" The deputy general dragged the chest over with the intent to bandage it for Lu Guangbai. When he saw the wound, he said, "General, it scrapes so badly. We have to get the military medic over to take a look." Lu Guangbai motioned for him to shut up and felt around the side of his thigh for a dagger. As he poured wine around his wound, he heated up the dagger in the candle flame until it was searing hot. The deputy general hurriedly held up his sleeve for him. Ingshi had never seen such a ruthless person before, and his limbs went cold as he listened to the sound of rotten flesh being gouged out. Lu Guangbai sprinkled the medicine over the wound and got the deputy general to bandage it for him. The cavalry is hard to deal with. Without the deployment order, we can't pursue our way out of the delimited range, and we are naturally too occupied to bother with this when we are going back and forth engaged in attrition battles. Having cleaned up his wound, Lu Guangbai propped up his knee and looked at Ingshi to ask, "Did Gong come with the military provisions?" Ingshi forced back his disgust and nausea and nodded his head. Lu Guangbai rose and said, "I'll go take a look." With that, he stepped out of the tent with his deputy general and headed towards the military provisions. Those who had escorted and transported the military provisions had already withdrawn. Lu Guangbai made his way into the granary and opened up a burlap sack. Yet when he saw the provisions within, he frowned. He reached out to grab a handful. It was all damp rice and moldy flour. "General," the deputy general said, "it's not just damp rice and moldy flour that were sent this time. The quantity is pathetic too. Our Bienjuan commandery has 20,000 men, and troops are dispatched every day to engage in guerrilla warfare. There's a lot of running around involved, and naturally the amount of food consumed is high too. It can't be compared to the garrison troops of the other 4 commanderies. This bit of provision can't even last us until autumn. Lu Guangbai's scarred palm released these grains and said, "The Secretariat Elder Hai has always looked out for us. Last year's military provisions were also allocated pretty quickly. Is there a reason for the reduction in quantity this time?" The Deputy General's chest heaved. Several times he wanted to say something, but then he held it back. Lu Guangbai said, "Just say it if you have something to say. What is this for? Someone gag your mouth?" "General!" The Deputy General was indignant. He stepped forth to grab those grains, and his emotions surged. He said in a tearful voice, "They gave us less. Why? Isn't it all because they were in a hurry to transfer it to Libe armored cavalry? What the heck? Libe armored cavalry are all good men and soldiers, while the garrison troops of our Bienjuan commandery are all lowly bastards. They have always loved fawning on those at the top and bullying those at the bottom. They trampled on you every opportunity they can. But these are wars we are waging. We are all risking our own lives here, so on what grounds can they play favorites? What issue do they have with our Bienjuan commandery? We are already this poor, and they still want to skimp here and there. I asked those escorts who transported the food what are we to do in autumn, and they said the imperial court told us to play it by ear and take care of it ourselves. Do as we deem fit. Fuck them to hell and back." The Deputy General clenched his fists. Chidong's military provisions were reduced by half to supply to Libe. But don't the other commanderies need to fight too? They still have military fields to provide them with food to eat, but we can only eat empty air. Once autumn arrives, the horses of the Biantia 12 tribes will all be fattened up, and when that time comes, the battles will be even harder to fight. With just this bit of grains not a word more. Lu Guangbai bellowed at the Deputy General, stopping him in his tracks. He stood for a long time in the darkness. Eventually, he looked at the starry sky outside and said in a hoarse voice, "I'll think of a way." The fire beacon towers of the Bienjuan commandery sat in silence between the rolling terrains, while the night, like the reversed flow of filthy waters, sealed this opening and obstructed them from seeing the light. Lu Guangbai did not have the prestigious reputation of the other 3 generals. He was just like the stubborn rock stationed at the edge of the desert, enduring the weight of oppressive pressure from 3 directions until it gradually eroded his originally round and smooth body into one with sharpened edges. Many people from their Lu clan had died, leaving only him to inherit Lu Pingyan's spear. He was this slow-witted. And he was this unlikable. He made a name for himself pretty late in his years, having none of the natural talents Xiao Jiming and Qi Juyin possessed. He was Lu Pingyan's youngest and stupidest son. Yet it was also such a him who held up the Bienjuan commandery after Lu Pingyan's retirement. He choked off the strategic passage in which the Biantia cavalry wanted to penetrate and advance through. He did not have a master. He was a general who learned his craft by following Lu Pingyan into the desert and tumbling his way out from the yellow sands. He treated others with sincerity. He was riddled with scars all over. This very night Lu Guangbai did not sleep. He sat hugging his spear on the earthen slope before the camp, unable to think of a way to resolve the shortage of military provisions. Qi Juyin had jurisdiction over the 5 commanderies. All these years, she had emptied her own private savings to give them financial aid. He could not keep asking Qi Juyin for help every single time. His old man at home was still ill too, so he could not ask Lu Pingyan to drag his sick body around to borrow money either. The Deputy General saw Lu Guangbai's lonely back when he got up in the middle of the night to relieve himself. He wanted to go over and tell him to rest, but before he could approach, he saw Lu Guangbai bending over and reached out to touch the soil at his feet. For a long time, Lu Guangbai never raised his head. Chapter 94. Raging Waves. Chapter 94. Raging Waves. Wei Huaigu was sent to prison to be placed on trial, while Yang Qing of the Provincial Administration Commission of Jueshi was also apprehended by the imperial bodyguards and taken to the imperial prison. This was a major case in the year of Tianqin, and the entire court of civil and military officials was watching. Shun Zichuan moved very quickly. From the confession submitted by Yang Qin, he found out that Wei Huaigu had been reselling military provisions for profits ever since the 4th year of Xianda. Using his position as the Minister of Revenue, Wei Huaigu would buy military provisions from Yang Qing each time he supervised the handling of the military provisions. Then he resold it at a higher price to Shi Hongxian, who then separately sent these military grains via sea and land towards the 6 prefectures of Zhongbua and Shuhai to make a huge profit off them. In this way, he split the land tax among the commoners' fields in the 13 cities of Jueshi and let the common folk down there bear the tax. Since you've already been doing this for so long, then why was it only this time that you were pricked by your conscience into reporting Wei Huaigu through the relay report? Shun Zichuan looked through Yang Qing's confession. Yang Qing had been in the imperial prison for a few days. He lowered his head and said, "This time, moldy grains were used to fill it up. It's not the same as before. Li Bei is going to fight a war. These grains would be the poison that causes the death of the soldiers at the frontier pass if they were sent over. I was afraid that something bad would really happen to the hereditary prince of Li Bei." There were no other people at the sides of the table. Xiao Qie, who was sitting in the shadows, said out of the blue, "You are so certain that these foods will reach the mouth of the hereditary prince?" Yang Qing shifted his arms uneasily. His lips turned pale as he said, "That's what I was afraid of. Although I'm greedy for wealth, I don't want to cause anyone to lose their lives." "Don't be afraid." Shun Zichuan cast a glance at Xiao Qie and softened his tone at Yang Qing. "This place may be the imperial prison, but this is a case that is personally supervised and tried by His Majesty. If you have anything to say, you can voice them all out here." The contrast between both of them was stark. Yang Qing gulped down his saliva. He was already a little dazed from the non-stop interrogation all night. He muttered, "I didn't know it." "I didn't. What didn't you know?" Shun Zichuan asked gently. "I didn't know that something would really happen to the hereditary prince of Li Bei." Yang Qing began to choke with sobs as he spoke. "I didn't know. I was worried the Li Bei armored cavalry would suffer a defeat because of this and let the Bianxia cavalry assault their way in once again." Xiao Qie bent over slightly, his body like a vicious beast whose shadows loomed over Yang Qing's face. He said in a frosty voice, "So you know this batch of military provisions can lead to the defeat of the Li Bei armored cavalry. Yet you still had them sealed and loaded up the carriages. You deserve to die." Yang Qing grew terrified under Xiao Qie's gaze. Stumped for words, he cried incoherently, "Your lordship, I plead guilty. I deserve to die." "You won't die." With compassion brimming in his expressive, upturned eyes on his jade-like handsome face, Shun Zichuan said, "The main perpetrator is Wei Huaigu in this case. He used his position to coerce you, and there was nothing you could do. I understand these difficulties of yours. His lordship understands it as well. Yang Qing, you entered government service in the era of Yongyi. You have been an official in Jueshi for half of your life, and you have made your way up to the post of Assistant Administration Commissioner. You are a capable man as assessed from the Kudu's inspection. Now that Jiang Qinshan has left Jueshi to be transferred to Zhongbua as a provincial governor, the position of the Provincial Administration Commissioner of Jueshi will be vacant. Going by age and experience, you will be the first choice for recommendation when the Ministry of Personnel is deliberating over it. You see, your future was supposed to be bright, and yet you forfeited it all for that bit of money. It's not worth it." Hunching over, Yang Qing sobbed. "I heard that you were from Baimazu in your early years. Your family was poor, and you lost your father at the age of 6. Your siblings and you were single-handedly raised by your mother alone. She sent you and your brothers to school and spent most of her life enduring hardship. She finally waited for the day you became an official and had your own residence, yet you committed such a grave mistake. Shun Zichuan was particularly compassionate as he continued, from today onwards, she'll be left all alone and forsaken, and she still has to endure scorns and curses because of this case. How can you be so heartless? Yang Qing could not help himself and burst out crying. He was a scholar to begin with, and he knew of propriety, justice, integrity, and honor. He was the most filial in serving and attending to his mother's needs back at home. Covering his face with both hands he cried, "I have made such an inhumane mistake. I'm too ashamed to see her again." This case is still not closed. Whether you will be executed or not is still up for debate. Xiao Qie threw down the confession and looked askance at him. Since you still know to be ashamed, then you still have a shred of conscience left. All the questions I'm going to ask you next will not be recorded in the confession. If you answer truthfully, I'll think of a way to preserve your life so that your old mother may live her remaining years in peace and comfort. But if you dare to prevaricate in an attempt to fob me off, then I'll immediately have you publicly beheaded at the foot of Duanqing's city gate as a warning to the rest. With one relay report, you gave Wei Huaigu away and ruined many people's golden rice bowl. 2. You are a man in the trade, so you understand best what fate awaits those widows and orphans. Without me to vouch for you, the lives of everyone in your family will be in imminent danger. Yang Qing cried for a long time. When he stopped, Shun Zichuan personally held out a cup of hot tea to him. He wiped his tears hastily and repeatedly said his thanks. With both hands holding the tea, he fell silent for a long while before he said, "Your lordship's willingness to protect me is a great life-saving kindness. I don't dare to ask to re-enter government service as an official again. All I wish for is to be sent into exile. This case implicates way too much. It's not something that can be clearly explained in a short time. I'll tell your lordship about it slowly. Ever since the first year of the era of Xianda, the state treasury has been depleting in substantial amount. The Ministry of Revenue's accounts are all messed up. Hua Xiqian, as the Grand Secretary of the Grand Secretariat, collaborated with Pan Rugi to approve many projects that squandered away public funds. For example, Linlang Garden in Qinzhou. Most of them weren't really built for real. These gardens were merely just a pretext to pass through the Grand Secretariat's examination and gain its approval so that everyone could draw out money from the state treasury together. The collusion between officials and merchants for illegal gains was something everyone in the palace knew. The money really flowed like water flowing into these people's pocket. In the 4th year of Xianda, Wei Huaigu dragged me into this. I'll be honest, your lordship. I know these money shouldn't be touched, but I had no choice. When local officials like us enter the capital, the Pan and Hua factions will take turns to call on us and ask for ice respect. No doubt you would have also heard of the widely spread practice of spending money to get a promotion those few years. The noble clans have the dignity of a noble clan to uphold. Those who are truly held back by all these ice respect and coal respect 3 are officials from humble backgrounds like me. Without money, we can't enter the central administration. Without money, we won't have a job to do. That year, Jueshi faced a locust plague, and not a single grain was reaped from the 13 cities. It was Jiang Qingshan who did all he could to shoulder this responsibility and save our lives. He forcibly opened up the commercial granaries to release food aid relief to the commoners, and this was how the situation did not deteriorate into a famine. It was also because of this that Jiang Qingshan became the thorn in the flesh of the prominent businessmen in Jueshi. Kudu also knew this at that time. The debtors hunted him down to his residence, and his mother even had to weave fabrics to pay off the debt even at her age. But what debt was he repaying? We all know it very well that he was repaying the debt on behalf of the imperial court. But there was one thing that no one else but those of us from the Provincial Administration Commission of Jueshi knew, and that was, the defeat of the Zhongbua troops was too timely. Why do I say that? The state treasury was empty at that time, and Jueshi had faced a calamity. Li Bei and Bianjuan Commandery still had to deal with the Bianxia cavalry. The harvest of Hezhou further down was dismal too. People from the various areas were already starving to death at the beginning of the year. The Ministry of Revenue was forced into a corner, but they had no way to provide aid reliefs to the various areas because the state treasury had already been emptied out. Hua Xiqian had to give the various regions an explanation, and Hai Liangyi of the Grand Secretariat was also looking into the accounts. In no time, Hua Xiqian was caught between a rock and a hard place. This matter put him in a terrible fix. At that time, the Hua clan in Diqing sold their manor, and it was the Shi clan who took over. We all know that Hua Xiqian wanted to backfill the state treasury by doing this. He wanted to cover up the matter. But a vacuum of that size was not something he alone can fill in, and so, Hua Xiqian began to collect his debt from the others. I don't know if Hua Xiqian got his money back. But it was at this juncture that the Bianxia cavalry suddenly launched an assault at Chasha River. Duanzhou's garrison troops suffered a crushing defeat, and Shen Wei withdrew and holed himself up like a tortoise, leading to Zhongbua's defeat one after another. Li Bei armored cavalry and Qidong garrison troops came from both sides to provide reinforcements. It was at the gate of Kudu that they stopped the Bianxia tribes from penetrating deeper. But although the homeland was reclaimed, the massacred cities had already turned into deserted ones, and Jueshi's subsequent resupply of relief grains were precisely the grains of the 6 prefectures of Zhongbua. Shen Zichuan abruptly rose to his feet. He stood in the darkness without saying a word. Xiao Qia's heart went icy as well. He and Shen Zichuan had made so many assumptions in the past, but it had never occurred to them that the defeat of the Zhongbua troops might be to fill up the empty granaries at the back and pay off the debt for Hua Xiqian and the officials who were caught in a difficult position owing to the state treasury investigation. That was more than 100,000 people. Shen Zichuan stupefyingly supported himself on the table and looked ahead as he said in a hoarse voice, That was the lives of 40,000 soldiers. Do you know what you are talking about? Shen Zichuan was caught off guard by these words. He spent 6 years convincing himself that these people possibly died in the struggle for power. These vivacious people, these young lives, all of them existed once like Ji Mu. Duanzhou was the first door in. They all died so tragically. The singing reverberating in Chashir Sinkhole was Shen Zichuan's nightmare for a lifetime. The defeat of Zhongbua troops led to countless of victims. No one went to collect the bodies of the soldiers who died in battle. Blood inundated the dreams of survivors. In this oppressive atmosphere, Yang Qing held his head and said, The filling of military grains this time really made me afraid. Zhongbua still had the chance to be rescued, but Li Bei can only rely on the reinforcement from Luoxia Pass. Once the Bianxia cavalry breaches Li Bei, I'll become a sinner condemned through the ages. The defeat of Zhongbua troops and the arrival of the Bianxia cavalry were too coincidental. Hanshi tribe's transfer of their troops south was not a coincidence. It was because they received news. In that case, Hanshi tribe's encounter with Xiao Jiming at the Hongyan Eastern Mountain Range this time was definitely no coincidence either. There were people everywhere in Kudu, Zhongbua, Li Bei, and even Qidong, to pass information to the 12 tribes of Bianxia. They raised the 12 tribes of Bianxia like they were raising a jackal so starving it would lap up everything. And when necessary, they would let it into the territory to gobble up all the traces that could not be wiped clean. I don't know if there is anyone else in the central administration who is still doing such a thing. Yang Qing said fearfully. But it's really a close call this time. There are already reserves in the state treasury, and the Grand Secretariat is also carrying out stringent audits on the Ministry of Revenue's account. It'd be selling out the state if the Biancha cavalry is released into our territory again. I don't know. I don't dare to bet on it. There are people monitoring my private correspondences, so I could only inform Kudu through the relay report. Since you want to report Wei Huaigu, Shinzichuan suddenly lifted up Yang Qing. Why did you affix it with the Ministry of Revenue's tag when you sent out the urgent relay report? The very first moment this report enters Kudu, it would land in Wei Huaigu's hands. Yang Qing lost his grip on the teacup. Under the sound of the porcelain cup shattering, he said in a trembling voice, "No, no. I had it affixed with the Ministry of Justice's tag." Shinzichuan was stunned. Looking fearful, Yang Qing said in disbelief, "I'd no doubt die if this report were to land in Wei Huaigu's hands. I know that the Minister of Justice, Kong Chiu, is a courageous one. He isn't born from a noble clan, so he will definitely not put it off or cover it up for Wei Huaigu. That's why I triple-checked before dispatching it that it was the Ministry of Justice I tagged. We've been had." Xiao Qia grasped hold of Shinzichuan in support. The expression in his eyes was ruthless. Wei Huaigu isn't the culprit this time. When Wei Huaigu received the relay report, he knew that someone had already read the content. This was a silent coercion. He had to turn himself in. Chapter 95. Mansion. Chapter 95. Mansion. Wei Huaigu, who was over 50 years old, was stripped of his official robes, thereby turning into a prisoner in white. He was shackled, with iron bars separating him and Xiao Qia. No one had ever maltreated him these few days he had been put on trial. His hair, which had been tied up in a bun, was tidy and his face was clean. It was just that he seemed to have aged by several years in a few short days. He looked very haggard. The trial ended last night. Wei Huaigu sat on the chair and said to both of them, "My confession has already been submitted, and I'm now waiting to be sentenced. What else do you want to ask? Embezzlement of state treasury funds, resale of military provisions for illegal gains, and the poisoning of the generals at the frontier, all three charges are capital crimes." Xiao Qia looked closely at Wei Huaigu. Wei Huaixing has also been removed from his post and thrown into prison to await the impeachment order. The fall of your Wei clan's line of direct descendants took out 2 imperial court ministers along with it. How is it that you could bear to let it happen this time? This matter concerns Li Bei. Who would dare to bend the law and play favorites? There's no one to protect me. Wei Huaigu adjusted his sitting posture as if he was still sitting in the main seat at the Ministry of Revenue's office compound. He looked at Xiao Qia. "Your father has now come out of obscurity to take up the mantle. His Majesty probably won't even dare to sleep these few days. The Prince of Li Bei is still the same tough nut as he was back in those days. He knows what to do to give them a rap on the knuckles. You should have known that those military provisions were to be delivered to Li Bei when you were filling the military provisions up with moldy grains. But you still did it all the same, didn't you? At that time, you weren't the slightest bit afraid that there's no one protecting you." Xiao Qia shifted a little and continued, "To send these things into my eldest brother's mouth, adulterating it was only the first step. When the grains arrived at Li Bei, you bribed the officials in charge of examining the granary so that they would close an eye and send the stuff to the camp. This was the second step. Then you bribed the mess cooks of the Li Bei armored cavalry and mixed this poisonous stuff into the dishes before they were sent to the soldiers at the frontier pass for consumption. This was the third step." Xiao Qia stopped and looked out of the corner of his eyes at Wei Huaigu. "These arrangements take time and effort. The moment an accident happens, you won't be able to deny your involvement in it. Not only will you not get away with it, you'll even be subjected to a probe by the Ministry of Justice, which will bring your crime of reselling military provisions for profits to light. You are not this kind of person." Wei Huaigu did not answer Xiao Qia's question immediately. Instead, He looked at Shinzichuan, who had been sitting behind Xiaoqie all this while. He laughed and pointed at Shinzichuan, saying, "Second young master has made progress, having been in Kudu for 6 years. Back then, when you first entered the capital, you spent the whole day looking for fights and braying for blood. Vice Commander Shen knows this from experience, right? That's why I said Xiao Fangxiu is an iron fist to dare to put his son on the edge of the blade to polish. You really have your father to thank for being able to grow into the person you are now." Xiaoqie looked at Wei Huaigu with indifference. It was unexpectedly Shen Zichuan who pushed aside the confession statement. With both hands slightly clasped together on the table, he said calmly to Wei Huaigu without so much a smile or wrath, "That's right. You find it unfair to see such a Xiao Suan. Your son spent all day mixing with the brothel crowd during the years of Xianda. By the time the Grand Secretariat had a change of personnel in the reign of Tianqin, it would have been insurmountably hard for him to enter officialdom through the imperial examinations even if he wanted to. You are already at this age. Yet the Wei clan does not have a descendant of direct lineage who is capable of keeping the Wei clan going. You placed your hopes on a marriage alliance, but a pity the Fei clan knows that the Wei clan is on the decline, and Commandery Princess Zhao Yue eventually married into the Pan clan. In your post as the Minister of Revenue, you've repeatedly demoted and relegated newly appointed officials to remote areas. What you fear was being replaced by the up-and-coming talent. Today, the Wei clan seemed to be still at the height of its power, but in truth, it is already water that is about to spill over. With your death, the Wei clan is doomed to fall." Touching his shackles, Wei Huaigu said, "The power of a clan is like the tides, whose rise and fall is a fact of the world. It thrives one moment and declines the next. All of it are predestined. There's nothing for me to regret when the time comes for the Wei clan. History has gone through several generation changes for as long as Dazhou has existed to this day. Everything is ever-changing, only the 8 great clans have not changed. Therefore, it's only with my death that the Wei clan can survive." "Will the 8 great clans really remain unchanged?" Xiaoqie said. "The internal strife between the Shi brothers led to the end of all their Di and Shu descendants. There is already no one left today to carry on the bloodline. In the future, the Shi clan will no longer be the Shi clan it used to be. It's only a matter of time before they are squeezed out of the political game." But Wei Huaigu laughed it off and said, "As long as the Shi clan still exists, they won't be booted out of the game. Today, you kill Shi Hongxian, wanting to cut up the Shi clan's family fortune, yet you can't bear to give up the Shi clan's businesses, so you still have to continue to rely on others to put things in order for you. So tell me, is the Shi clan still considered dead then? They merely lost a helmsman at the head. This is a temporary predicament. As long as that eldest madam of theirs still wants to control the business under Shi's name, then when she finds a new flame in the future, the other party can only marry into the family tree and change his surname. The child they bear will still take on the surname Shi. And this is a new direct line of descendants that will continue the Shi clan's lineage." Candle wax dripped like tears mottling the sides of it. Night was coming to an end. Silence reigned on the outside. Wei Huaigu stood up, like an elder guiding intellectual discussions. "I have a question. I have always wanted to ask Xiao Fangxiu, but there is no more chance for me to now, so I can only ask you. Xiaoqie, your father came from a humble background. He experienced hardship at the frontier before he finally tided over the sea of suffering to possess his own turf and title. You call yourselves people who broke the shackles of the noble clans. But it has been 30 years now, and Li Bei and the Xiao clan have become a single inseparable entity. He came to have sons too. You and Xiao Jiming are both legitimate sons born of the principal wife. To avoid disputes between the son of lawful births born of the principal wives and son of common births born of concubines, he even refused to remarry for or get a concubine. He turned Xiao Jiming and you into the only choices to lead the Li Bei armored cavalry. Isn't this precisely the impenetrable fortress built as a safeguard at the inception of a noble clan? You are now walking the same exact path as us. After a moment of silence, Shao Chia said, You think this way because you don't understand that there are people in this world willing to be tied down by love. My father doesn't remarry or take a concubine simply because he is only willing to exchange lifetime vows of conjugal bliss with my mother in this life of his. Libe armored cavalry is a heavy cavalry 5 he established. He understands this army better than anyone else. This is his third son, one that is far more important than my eldest brother and me. All along, the ones who have been seeing my eldest brother and me as the only choices for Libe armored cavalry are you people. My being in Kudu doesn't tether the Libe armored cavalry at all, only Xiao Fangxiu and Xiao Jiming. You still have not understood one thing. My father has indeed set up an impenetrable fortress around the position of the Libe armored cavalry's commander-in-chief. But that is not a bastion of iron to safeguard the status of a noble clan. Rather, it is a weight, a test, of whether one can truly become the chief commander of an army to lead Libe armored cavalry into bearing the ravages of the elements against the fortress amidst those ceaseless confrontations with Bianxia. 30 years ago, Xiao Fangxiu was the man who broke through this layer of fortress. 10 years ago, the one who did the same was Xiao Jiming. If someday, someone is similarly able to break through this layer of fortress, has no fear of hardships and suffering, and is willing to be forged and tempered in such a way, then, he shall be the new commander-in-chief of the Libe armored cavalry. You made it out to be all so honorable and dignified for Xiao Fangxiu, but in reality, the Xiao clan has been monopolizing the military power of Libe all these years. The expression in Wei Huaigu's I was slightly mocking. That's just because the two men who have borne such a weight one after another happen to be surnamed Xiao. Shao Chia's eyes suddenly revealed a brilliance that made it hard for one to look right at him in the eyes. In the dimness of this fading light, he was both Xiao Fangxiu and Xiao Jiming, as well as the pride the 3 men of the Xiao clan had hidden deep under their armors. He said, You people called my father an alpha wolf. There are no prejudices against one's blood lineage in a pack of wolves. As long as you can defeat us, you can lead us. Everything the Libe armored cavalry has to show for today is what it deserves. Someday, Shao Chia's voice came to a stop. But Shen Zichuan knew what he was going to say next. He wanted to say that someday when he returned to Libe, he would also participate in such a fight amongst the wolves. As long as he could defeat the others, he would be the third alpha wolf. The source of their pride and willfulness was that they had never feared resistance. This was Xiao Fangxiu's soul, and he taught this kind of spirit to both of his sons, as well as the Libe armored cavalry. Do you know why the Qi clan, who similarly guards the frontier and who holds military power firmly in their hands, has never faced such animosity from the noble clans as the Xiao clan did? Wei Huaigu and Shao Chia looked at each other. He said mildly, Because you were all born with a rebellious bone. This pride is precisely the root cause of Kudu's distrust of Libe. And do you know why the noble clans would not fall? Because we know to go with the flow and seize the opportunities presented to us. The Li clan is the root, the foundation of Dajo. We surround it, see it born, let it grow. We alternate with one another and we give each other. We are the soil that sustains Dajo. The land you step on under your feet, and the sky you look at when you raise your head, they are the stability that arises as a result of the noble clans holding together. All those who want to break such a stability are enemies. 26 years ago, the crown prince of the Li clan led the Eastern Palace in an attempt to break the status quo. That was naive. The crown prince didn't understand that once the noble clans collapsed, the Li clan would rapidly wither too. That was why he was sure to die. Hua Xiqian may die as may Shi Hongxian. Same goes for me. But it's just our bodies that perish. The noble clan is not a world that can be overthrown by human power alone. Nobody, and I mean nobody, can defeat us. All these years, the only scholar of a humble background in the imperial court who truly broke through the siege to endanger us all is Hai Liangi. He used close to 30 years to lie low in patience. He has made his way up now, but does he dare to turn the world upside down without careful consideration? He rejuvenated the Imperial College and promoted scholars of humble background. Every step he takes is that careful and cautious, because he knows the outcome of using brute force to tussle will be the ruin of the empire. But how long can he still live? After his death, this phase will crumble and fall apart. It's impossible for him to succeed. Wei Huaigu suddenly burst out laughing. He held on to the bars and looked at Shen Zichuan. Qi Hualien led the Eastern Palace to act with haste and resolve. He would never let us off easily. He thought he could do it, but he ended up causing the death of the Crown Prince. All the geniuses in this world should learn to reflect on their shortcomings. He is a cautionary tale of political radicalism. Stop him. Shen Zichuan suddenly rose. Xiao Qia immediately reached out, but it was already too late. Wei Huaigu started to cough violently. He bent over, cupping the blood in his hands, and lifted his eyes to look at both of them. Amidst his intense pain and with blood in his mouth, he said, "You can't win. You are doomed to fail." Xiao Qia kicked the cell door open, hauled Wei Huaigu up, and pinched his mouth open. The filthy blood within trickled down. Wei Huaigu was just like the expiring candle in the wind. His limbs gradually stiffened amidst his convulsions, until he finally stopped moving, his eyes still open in a glare. The flame of the candle went out. Only the whimpers of the wind could be heard inside the prison. The imperial air. Xiao Qia let go of the corpse and strode out. The sky was brightening up a little outside, although it was still shrouded with dense, dark clouds. The rainstorm that had stopped seemed as if it was about to stage a comeback. Oppressiveness pervaded the air along with the sounds of chaotic footsteps. Xiao Qia pushed the door open and saw the panic-stricken girls in the prison. The stench of blood came assailing their nostrils. All the boys had been killed, their bodies lying haphazardly on the ground. Sweat formed on Xiao Qia's temples. He clutched Longli blade as his eyes swept across each of these terrified faces. He and Shen Zichuan had not made their moves yet. So who killed the imperial heir? Cool wind blew against Xiao Qia's soaked back. He had yet to turn around when he heard the gallops of a horse. Amidst the jolts and bumps, Fumin shouted in a fluster, Your lordship! Please head into the palace quickly. His Majesty is in imminent danger. Xiao Qia abruptly turned back, but Shen Zichuan pressed his hand down on Xiao Qia's arm. He was so calm that his gaze made Fumin's limbs tremble. He asked, What do you mean by imminent danger? Make yourself clear. With snot and tears running down his face, Fumin cried, His Majesty is critically ill. He is urgently summoning his lordship over for an audience with him. There is an important matter he wishes to entrust to his lordship. Chapter 96, Collapse. Chapter 96, Collapse. The skies overcast foreshadowed the incoming rainstorm. Xiao Qia took off Longli blade by the palace entrance and stepped into the dark and long hallway. Eunuchs kneeling on either side all kept quiet with their heads lowered. Silence befell in and outside of Mingli Hall. With scuttling steps, Fumin led Xiao Qia to the door and lifted the curtains. The bed curtains within the bedchamber were not drawn up. There was a suffocating heat inside, mixed with a hint of blood. Fumin whispered between sobs, Your Majesty, look. His lordship is here. Li Jianheng answered from within and said, Tell the rest to take their leave. I want to speak with the Marquis before the Secretariat Elder arrives. Do not disturb us. Fumin quietly exited with the other servants. Soon, Li Jianheng seemed to have shifted his body. He said, Pull the bed curtains open. Xiao Qia raised his hand and pulled the hanging curtains back. The bed was stained all over with blood. Li Jianheng looked as if he was soaking in a pool of filthy color. His chest heaved as he struggled to gasp for breath. Brother! Li Jianheng's pale face was full of tears and sweat. He wiped off the sweat with his trembling hand, but smeared his entire face with blood instead. Where the heck have you been? The anxiety is killing me. Mu Ru was lying beside Li Jianheng, dead. Xiao Qie suddenly felt a little lonesome. Even though he knew this meeting was a trap, he still agreed to this invitation just to live up to this word of brother from Li Jianheng. The brotherhood of their reckless youth was already crushed and shattered to smithereens under the unforgiving wheel of power, yet in this moment it seemed as though it was glued back together again. He felt as if he had returned to the past. He hung up the curtains and said in a raspy voice, "It was very windy on the way here, and there were too many people on Shenwu Street, which made it inconvenient to ride a horse." Li Jianheng raised the hand that was covering up his wound and looked at where he was stabbed. He said, "You have been a good brother to me. You clearly knew this trip was dangerous, yet you still came. It is not in vain that I, Li Jianheng, could be buddies with you." Xiao Qie pulled over a chair to sit down and looked at Li Jianheng as his Adam's apple bobbed several times. He said, "I had already told you a long time back that she was not a good match for you. But I liked her so much." Li Jianheng blankly rubbed the blood between his fingers. "I thought she liked me too. Fuck, so this is how much it hurts to be stabbed with a knife." Xiao Qie rubbed his face and propped his elbows on his knees. He said, "What did you want to tell me now that you have called me over?" Li Jianheng turned his eyes and chuckled at Xiao Qie through his tears before his face fell again. Choking with sobs, he said with a broken voice, "I called for you, so you came. The fuck is wrong with you, Xiao Suan? Do you know that it's full of people out there waiting for you with swords in their hands?" Just like Xiao Qie had done when he was resolving tough situations for him in the past, he calmly nodded and said, "I know." Li Jianheng forced down a sob and said, "If you didn't come, I'd not have to apologize." Xiao Qie's eyes reddened. He said, "You are the emperor. There is no need for the emperor to apologize." Li Jianheng covered his wound and bawled his eyes out while shaking his head. He sobbed, Brother, I really wanted to be a good emperor. I even memorized the texts a few days ago. Tell this to the Secretariat Elder on my behalf when you head out." Xiao Qie said, "You are the emperor. Tell him yourself." Gasping and crying in a hoarse voice, Li Jianheng said, "That won't do. I'm the emperor, I cannot go myself. It's too humiliating. He is a loyal subject. Tell me, why am I this stupid? I really wanted to call him my second father. When I'm scared that after I die, both of you will also end up stabbed by the others." Xiao Qie's voice turned raspy as he answered, "How are you going to leave when you are such a scaredy cat?" Li Jianheng gestured, "Imperial brother is waiting for me. I'm scared that he's going to scold me again. I've let him down." Xiao Qie snorted a laugh and said, "That's all you've got?" Li Jianheng's breath grew rapid. He pursed his parched lips again and again, then said, "I've let you down too. I've not stuck by you enough. We are both in situations that we have control over. I really regret it. Suan, leave. When you get outside, just go. Get on your horse and go home. I have nothing to give you, but it's also a shame not to gift you anything." Xiao Qie rubbed his face again. Li Jianheng raised a finger and pointed toward the wall. He muttered indistinctly, That bow is what you helped me obtain from Imperial brother. But fuck, I can't pull it. Take it with you. The wolf pup should stay in the grasslands. That thumb ring of yours must be rusted by now." Xiao Qie said heartlessly, "I don't want it. That's the conqueror bow of your clan." "You are the conqueror." Li Jianheng's voice was already very soft. He gazed at the bow. "In my next life, don't make me the emperor again. I want to be a swallow of Dazhou, nesting under the roof of riches and glory." He looked quietly at the conqueror bow and did not move any more. The wind blew against the drapes in the bedchamber. Sitting, Xiao Qie listened as that muffled thunder struck and torrential rain exploded forth. Han Qing finished up the last mouthful of tea, and held the teacup in his hands as he walked out of the door to look at the 8 Great Training Division's soldiers who were standing by in combat readiness. He flung the teacup onto the ground and boomed at the top of his voice, "The Imperial Army of Kudu only has 8,000 people. Without receiving news, the men at Mount Fong military grounds can't come to provide reinforcement. Xiao Qie is already a trapped beast in a cage. Today we must take him down." Heavy rain rumbled. The sound of densely clustered footsteps surrounded the imperial palace like layers of walls. Sheaths of blades scraped against armors as the 8 Great Training Divisions laid a heavy siege outside the bedchamber. Fumin could no longer stand up as he listened to those sounds. The eunuchs each cowered in the corners, lest they were taken to be sacrificed to these swords. Xiao Qie finally stood up. Under the intersection of light and shadows, he put down the bed curtains for Li Jianheng. Then he turned around to take down the conqueror bow that weighed 100 kadi. The doors had long been opened. Xiao Qie pushed aside layers upon layers of fluttering drapery and walked towards the heavy rain without so much a look back. Han Qing led the men into drawing their blades. There was nothing for him to shout, because they had already won. They wanted to change the world in this heavy bout of downpour and make Xiao Qie kneel once more. Xiao Qie looked at those dark and dense masses of heads. He strode a step out and walked down along the long stairs. He had no blade. When the rainwater wiped off his indifference, he was already clashing with that group of people. He held out the conqueror bow horizontally to intercept the blades, then pushed back against the wall of people into a retreat with an unrelenting, indomitable aura that suppressed the roar of the torrential rain. Shen Zichuan spurred his horse across the street, with the imperial bodyguards and imperial army behind him like a red serpent as they crashed through the palace gates under the flashes and glints of their blades and galloped their way within. The entire palace was already surrounded by armors. Pandemonium broke loose as the sound of fighting and killing at close quarters filled the air. The influx of horses sped up the fighting. Ignoring the sea of people, Lang Tao Shui Jin charged right for Xiao Qie. Xiao Qie used the momentary opening to flip atop the horse and caught hold of Longli blade, which Shen Zichuan had tossed over. Xiao Qie suddenly drew his blade and said, "Kudu is not the hometown in my dreams. I'm going home today. Whoever dares to stand in my way, I'll kill him." With that, he clamped the horse tightly with his legs and drew blood with a brandish of his blade. With the torrential rain pouring down on them, Xiao Qie forcibly killed a bloody path out. The battlefield retreated from the palace interior to the street. Seeing as the situation did not look good, Han Qing hurriedly shouted, "Guard the city gate to the death. We mustn't let this vile spawn who killed the sovereign and plotted a rebellion leave tonight." How was the 8 Great Training Divisions the Imperial Army's match? Even if they had many men, they were still afraid to death as the master of these wolves and tigers forced them back into a retreat. The city gate had long been shut. Shen Zichuan held his blade and went up the city wall first. He kicked over the obstructions in his way and told his men to open the city gate. That tightly shut gate lifted with a rumble. Beyond that curtain of rain was the home Xiao Qie had been longing for 6 years. Han Qing turned back and shouted, "Hurry and bring him over!" Xiao Qie's horse had already galloped out of the city. He raised a hand to motion to Ding Tao to take the men and rush towards the military grounds at Mount Fong. They had to take these 20,000 men from the Imperial Army away with them. He turned his horse around among the crowd of people and opened up his arms to Shen Zichuan, who was at the top of the city wall, and said to him in a deep, somber voice, "Lanzhao, come with me." But the imperial bodyguards stood tall and still. In the heavy rain, Shen Zichuan held on to the battlement of the wall and gazed at Xiao Qie as if he wanted to get a full, clear look at him. The 8 Great Training Divisions had swarmed up again and were about to pursue their way out of the city gate. That highly suspended city gate let out a muffled groan, as if it could not hold up to gravitational force. Iron chains swiftly recoiled, and the city gate went crashing down with a thunderous bang. Suan. Shen Zichuan raised his voice and said gently to him through the heavy rain. Go home. Xiao Qia felt as though his heart had been dunked in icy water. He clenched the reins tightly, already spurring his horse back. The city gate slammed onto the ground with a thud, completely cutting off the path of the pursuing soldiers from the 8 great training divisions, keeping them within the city, and also completely shutting Xiao Qia out on the other side of the gate. Xiao Qia shouted himself hoarse, as if he was a beast that had been enraged. Shen Lanzhao. Shen Zichuan did not look at Xiao Qia again. Instead, he turned around to look at Han Qing and that densely packed troop of soldiers. Han Qing turned his head and spat out a mouthful of saliva. He said in a ferocious voice, Shen Zichuan, you've ruined things for me. You think you are worthy to call yourself an imperial bodyguard? Shen Zichuan looked down on him and said in a frosty voice, Since Ji Wufan, the imperial bodyguards have always been heroes of indomitable spirits and clear consciences. You people lay a trap and conspire to murder the Son of Heaven. Han Qing, it's entirely justified for me to kill you. Han Qing threw his head back and laughed out loud. He said, What are you? The last evil remnant of the Xin clan. I treated you well, having guided and supported you many times, and this is how you repay me? Here. Bring the man over and show him to Vice Commander Shen. A disheveled Qi Huilian was dragged out. He fell into the rainwater and cursed, Treacherous traitor. Yanking at the chain, Han Qing spurred the horse forward and dragged Qi Huilian through the street. He pointed at Qi Huilian and said to Shen Zichuan, Haven't you been looking for him for a long time? He's here. Shen Zichuan, come and get him. Traitor, traitor. Qi Huilian was boiling with fury as the dragging smeared his face with muddy water. Han Qing looked at Shen Zichuan's pale face, then at the dark expression in his eyes. He said, Your eldest brother is the hereditary prince of Jianxing. I remember that the Bianxia cavalry dragged him to his death alive. But there is no love lost between you both, so you weren't hurt by it at all. Are you hurting now that it's your teacher's turn today? Han Qing. Shen Zichuan spat out Han Qing's name through clenched teeth. You went to such trouble to hide teacher in your hands. What do you want? He was initially of great use. Han Qing suddenly turned hostile, but you let Xiao Qia go and ruin the trap I set. As such, you're no longer of use, and neither is he. If you still want him to live, then kowtow to me and admit your mistakes. Kneel and call me father loudly 3 times, and I'll spare him, and you as well. Shen Zichuan strode a big step forward and said, Deal. Bollocks. Qi Huilian raised his head from the muddy water. He wiped off the filth and climbed to his feet. Staring at Shen Zichuan, he said, The reason I taught you the classics was not for you to allow yourself to be humiliated by anyone. I, Qi Huilian, will not even bow down to heaven and earth. So how can you kneel to a despicable scum? The metal shackles clanked and clattered. Qi Huilian stumbled and shouted at the top of his lungs amidst the rain. Hundreds of years have passed like a dream, 3 and I still come and go as I wish. I have lived a life of wealth and glory, of fame and fortune, and I. He laughed maniacally as he tugged at the chains around his neck. I have laughed at all the heroic figures throughout the land, and there is not another talent who surpasses me in the world. Who is there who can be compared to me, Qi Huilian? I am the world-renowned Triple Yuan 4 top scholar from Yuzhou. When I conversed in His Majesty's presence and counseled His Majesty on state affairs. Oh, Han Qing, where were you? You were just a vermin in the ditch. It was as if Qi Huilian was intoxicated as he soaked in the rain. You vermins are unworthy of even carrying my shoes. The noble clans are like the rotten boils of this land. Tell Hailiangi that Dazhou is already beyond cure. He and I are both too powerless to turn the situation around. Qi Huilian arrogantly turned around amid the sound of his laughter and spat at Han Qing. He said, But I will not admit defeat. I will only serve as the imperial preceptor in this life. Lanzhou, the cage is now broken, and the world will rise in turbulent chaos. I have taught you all that I could teach you. This decaying world. With his back to Sun Zichuan, Qi Huilian suddenly choked with sobs. The downpour drenched his body through and through, but it could not douse his ideals and passion that had been blazing for years. In the past, he was always calling out for the crown prince, yet, at this moment, he could not bear to look back at Sun Zichuan. Why not overturn this decaying empire and go create a world you can call yours? Lanzhou, go. Don't look back. Teacher shall shoulder the burden of these 40,000 souls who have died unjust death on your behalf. Don't be afraid. His blood spattered in the rain, and he fell over on his back. Gazing at the sky, he murmured, have no fear. A sudden clap of thunder erupted. Sun Zichuan cried out involuntarily and fell to his knees. He stared blankly in a daze, giving the heavy rain free rein to land blows on him. In that endless silence, his mask was utterly torn to pieces. He finally let out the first howl of despair in 6 years. There was already no more sanity left in those reddened eyes of him. He clenched Yang Xinshui and suddenly drew his blade. Han Qing. He hated this empire to death. He also loathed these faces to death. Sun Zichuan propped himself up from the ground. Yang Xinshui slashed through the droplets of rain and flung out blood from among this heavy siege. He killed one, then killed another. He strode across those bodies, yet he seemed like a beast that had been abandoned. His blade sliced across throats, so swift that it seemed like a stream of mercury. Blood sprayed over half of Sun Zichuan's face. He was beside himself. The blood trickled like tears across his cheek. Retreating again and again, Han Qing bellowed, "Kill him!" The raindrops in the wind suddenly burst apart. In the blink of an eye, a long arrow had reached right before Han Qing. Xiao Qia leaped down from atop the city wall along the iron chain, kicked down a man, and flipped his hand over to draw his blade and stab it through the other party. With the corpse falling onto him, he moved swiftly and struck away the flashes of blades. When he extracted the blade, blood had already soaked both of his palms. Xiao Qia dragged Sun Zichuan back with one arm and whistled. Meng spread its wings and pounced. In the chaos, it pecked Han Qing's right eye, injuring it. Han Qing hastily covered his face in a panic. He heard the waves of horse hooves beyond the city. Ding Tao had already brought the men over in a swift charge forth. "Break down the gate!" Ding Tao shouted himself hoarse. The imperial army swept forth, but before they could take any action, they heard that city gate let out a dull, thunderous noise again as it was slowly hoisted up. Dragging the iron chain, Fei Xing gasped heavily a few times and led the imperial bodyguards to draw back with all their might. He cussed, "Fuck! Son of a bitch is so heavy, doggone it! Your lordship, get on your horse and run." Lang Tao Shui Jin swiftly galloped in from the opening. Sounds of killing and shouts engulfed Kudu. Thunderous sounds of killing and shouts similarly reverberated through the Bianjuan commandery, which was also engaged in a life-and-death battle. Lu Guangbai could barely lift his spear now. As he withdrew, he shouted, "Where are the reinforcements?" The deputy general, who had received several stabs and slashes himself, answered, "They didn't come." The rain howled. Lu Guangbai looked back in the direction of the camp. Xiao Qia had already gotten on his horse. He pressed Sun Zichuan to his chest before him and broke through the heavy rain towards the city gate. Lightning flashed and thunder boomed. A rift seemed to have been torn open in the sky. The rain poured mercilessly down. Lu Guangbai ripped off his tattered cloak and nailed the spear into the ground by his feet. He said over the sandstorm and rainstorm, "We can't fight on any more." The deputy general lay at the side of the sand slope and looked at him. "Fate wants to bind me here for life, but this is not the path I choose." Lu Guangbai took off the armor with Dazhou's imprint on it. He wiped the wind and frost off his face, and his eyes spoke of worldly weariness as he said a little self-mockingly, "The yellow dust submerged my brothers deep under. I no longer have a wish to bow in submission to an illusory fate. The imperial edict can't save my troops, and the imperial court can't fill the stomachs of my mounts." Xiao Qia had already galloped his way out of Kudu, with countless soldiers in pursuit behind him. They charged ahead, as if tearing apart the dark, rainy sky. "I'm no longer willing to lay down my life for this purpose." Lu Guangbai closed both of his eyes. Watery blood trickled along his fingers and dripped onto the yellow sands. His Adam's apple bobbed. When he finally opened his eyes, there was darkness in them. The blood on Shun Zichuan's cheek was washed away. Grieved sobs escaped his throat. He had already forsaken all of his past submissive obedience in this sorry escape. Like a sharp sword, they pierced through the heavy rain. Lu Guangbai washed both of his hands clean in the rain and held up his long spear once again. They were all prisoners pursued by fate. They were once willing to be shackled. But the rainstorm toppled over the great mansion, and its collapsed debris came assaulting towards them like a deluge of floodwater. 7 Onward, onward! I want to surmount that mountain. I am going to fight for myself. Chapter 97, In Pain. Chapter 97. In pain. Rain that had been falling for several days in a row subsided, leaving the public roads utterly muddy. Kudu fell into a state of mourning. With the sudden death of the young Emperor Tianqian, rumors that the Marquis of Dingdu, Xiao Qia, had colluded with the vice-commander of the imperial bodyguard cum northern judge, Shun Zichuan, to assassinate the emperor with the intent to rebel spread like wildfire as whispers behind closed doors in Kudu. As Emperor Tianqian did not have any imperial heir, the ministers presented a memorial to request the Empress Dowager to preside over the overall situation in place of the emperor. The Empress Dowager repeatedly excused herself on the grounds that the harem must not interfere with state affairs. It was only after the commander-in-chief of the imperial bodyguards, Han Qing, kowtowed thrice in remonstration that the Empress Dowager was convinced to step in. The 8 great training divisions were back in charge of Kudu's patrols and defenses, and the streets these days were crawling with patrol squads around the clock. Common folks did not dare to venture outdoors, and all the wine taverns and brothels kept their doors shut. It was as if the bustling scene of Kudu was a thing of the past. Even the color of the vermilion walls and glazed tiles in Kudu looked washed out by the misty drizzle. Hai Liangyi fainted several times when he wept before the coffin. He was now lying on the bed, unable to drink even a drop of medicine. His hair seemed to have turned entirely white overnight, and those spirited eyes of his that once gleamed with brilliance became dim and gloomy. They even looked particularly turbid and cloudy, after all those tears he had shed. "Teacher." Kong Qiu sat at the bottom with his head lowered and said, "You have to eat the medicine. Now that the world is in turmoil, everyone is waiting for you to take the helm and steer the state toward stability once more. You must take care of your health." The tear streaks at the corners of Hai Liangyi's eyes had not been fully wiped. His gaze drifted, and it was only after a long time that he said, "Take the helm and steer the state toward stability once more? Baran, there is nothing I can do anymore to save the situation." The bamboo tube in the courtyard tapped gently against the rock in the stream, exposing the cracked lines. Rain fell soundlessly. Yet there was no way those scars could be covered up. Hai Liangyi was too advanced in age. His vital energy had been worn out by the ups and downs of officialdom, and now, there were signs that he might never recover from his illness. Sorrow overwhelmed Kong Qiu. He sat where he was, weeping with his face covered. How did it come to this? Han Qing is a hypocrite who speaks honeyed words but has the malicious heart of a viper. He is petty and narrow-minded. Now that he has gained power, the entire imperial court of civil and military officials will be on tenterhooks. He forced Xiao Qi out, and so Li Bei is now without a shackle. From now on, Hai Liangyi suddenly started coughing. He propped himself up and vomited out blood. For a moment, he could not hold back his emotions, and he cried in a hoarse voice as he held onto the edge of the bed, "From now on, our territory will be torn asunder, and turbulent times will rise once again. The century-old empire of the Li clan will fall into ruins here. I've sinned. I'm a sinner. I, Hai Renshur, have spent my entire life shamelessly advancing my own agenda and navigating official circles. Yet it was all to toil in vain for the benefit of these people." Oh, with a head full of ash-white hair, Hai Liangi hunched over and wailed in a voice so hoarse and so full of despair that it was a tragic sight to behold. "Teacher, teacher!" Kong Qiu hastily came over to help him up, then looked back and shouted, "Men!" The door curtain was lifted, but it was Yao Wenyu who entered. On seeing what was happening, he immediately kneeled on the footrest and disregarded the filth as he wiped the tears and blood for Hai Liangi. At the same time, he directed the attendant to draw water and rinsed the handkerchief. Finally, he helped Hai Liangi lie down. After soothing him for a moment, he said to Kong Qiu in a soft voice, "Your Excellency, may I ask of you to wait outside, please?" Kong Qiu did not dare to disturb them any further and hurriedly retreated to wait outside. After a long time, the sound of Hai Liangi's cries receded. Yao Wenyu held the bowl in his hand and personally fed his teacher medicine. It was only after Hai Liangi fell into a drowsy sleep that he lifted the curtain and stepped out. Kong Qiu wanted to say something, but Yao Wenyu motioned for him to follow the attendant to the main hall first, while he himself made his way through the veranda to the back for a change of clean clothes. "Apologies for keeping you waiting, Your Excellency." Yao Wenyu got the attendant to serve tea and sat down below Kong Qiu. Kong Qiu held the teacup and was silent for a moment before he said, "Teacher has no son. I feel reassured with you here to take care of him. I shouldn't have brought up these matters earlier, and ended up making him sad. Although teacher has returned home ill, he is still concerned about state affairs. Even if Your Excellency doesn't bring it up, he would still find it hard to dismiss it from his mind. It'd have been better to cry it out than to bottle it all up in his heart." Yao Wenyu held up the teacup and stirred it a few times before saying, "The current situation is unstable and volatile. Teacher won't be able to rest for long anyway." Kong Qiu knew that Hai Liangi treated him like his own son. So he did not hold back and said with a sigh, "His Majesty's passing is so sudden. We are now already in a disadvantageous position. In addition, the Han clan has control of military power in Kudu, and we are presently in an irreversible situation in which Her Majesty is in power and in control of the government. After this incident, what is to be of Li Bei in the future?" Yao Wenyu was fair by nature, and he looked no different from porcelain as he held that teacup. He said, "The way things stand now, it's vital to discuss countermeasures to deal with the situation. Han Cheng's original position was that of the Imperial Bodyguard's Commander-in-Chief. If he wants to overstep his authority and enter the Grand Secretariat to take charge, his only option would be to ask the Empress Dowager to issue an imperial edict, so he isn't exactly without leverage. Wei Huaigu consumed poison and committed suicide because of the military provisions case. The temporary vacancy in the Grand Secretariat will thus have to be filled in by Your Excellency. With this, all the important affairs of the imperial court will still have to be deliberated over and endorsed by the various excellencies under teacher." On hearing this, Kong Qiu set down the teacup and humbly asked, "But the Empress Dowager is in charge of state affairs, and any changes in the Grand Secretariat is subjected to her whims and fancies. If she issued a change of people using Han Cheng as a pretext, then what should we do?" Yao Wenyu smiled and said, "The Empress Dowager being in charge of state affairs is a desperate measure to begin with. Her surname isn't Li, so the authority of acting on behalf of the Son of Heaven can't convince the public. The others don't matter, what's crucial is the Qi clan. Although Qi Juyin may be indolent by nature and doesn't care about government affairs, she has the Qi clan's reputation for loyalty resting on her shoulder. She will never allow the Empress Dowager and Han Qing to commit all kinds of outrages in Kudu. Since the Empress Dowager wants to win her over to her side, she won't go too far at this point in time. Rather than worry about the Empress Dowager's substitution attempt, Your Excellency might as well worry about Han Qing's subsequent plans. Kong Qiu said. Han Qing went all out to ingratiate himself with the Empress Dowager. He has succeeded. In my humble opinion, it's just the opposite. Yao Wenyu lifted his eyes to look at the misty rain at the entrance. At this time, it indeed seems like Han Qing has gained the favor of the Empress Dowager. But looking at the bigger picture in the long run, it's instead the Empress Dowager who is seeking connection with Han Qing. The Empress Dowager is able to rise to power because the Emperor had no heir. The imperial court cannot be without a master, and it was out of a lack of options that everyone compromised and made concessions. But Dazhou will definitely have a new son of heaven. The military power Han Qing holds in his hands is the real thing. His daringness to lay an encirclement trap for Xiao Qie to force him out and make his move in Mingli Hall is a clear indicator that he has backing and, therefore, has nothing to fear. You mean? Kong Qiu was shocked. Han Qing still has the imperial heir in his hands? Yao Wenyu drank the tea and said, Emperor Guangqing often ventured out of the palace to stay overnight. It's hard to say whether there is an imperial heir. It's just the situation is already now at this stage. Even if Han Qing doesn't have the imperial heir in his hands, he will think of every means possible to push someone out. Kong Qiu's heart went cold. He said, Han Qing has soldiers and horses, and the imperial bodyguards to boot. The officials in the capital are all tied down by their own families and might not necessarily be willing to conflict with him should a power struggle really break out. If he forcibly elects someone to sit on the dragon throne and rule the imperial court, Yao Wenyu, however, changed the topic and asked, Has the imperial army already passed through Danqing? The imperial army had already passed through Danqing, but they had yet to reach the territory of Zhongbua. Xiao Qie made haste all the way. The soldiers and horses all needed to rest, so they made a stop midway. Shun Zichuan was severely ill, with his old ailment and heartbreak acting up together. He seemed to be conscious, but yet he was not. It was as if he was lying in a puddle of dreams, engulfed once again by the rainwater and filthy blood. Ever since the epidemic the last time, Xiao Qie suspected that Shun Zichuan had never attempted to recuperate and nurse himself back to health. Instead, the medicines he had consumed in his early years had now turned into a form of latent poison lurking in his body. Xiao Qie did not dare to be negligent, so he made a stop and immediately went looking for a physician. Shun Zichuan's head was in a muddle, and the roaring in his ears persisted. He heard Xiao Qie's voice, yet he also seemed to hear teacher's shouts. He lay on the pillow. The few times he woke up, he thought that he was still in Duanzhou. He smelled the aroma of dishes, as if the one standing outside the door was his Shenyang, Hua Pingting. But he did not dare to move or look. He seemed to possess it all, but he still had nothing to his name. He thought he had killed off himself, and that this mortal flesh would not shed any more tears. But he had been too young, too full of youthful arrogance and ignorance. That was only because he had yet to experience immeasurable pain. He came this far, feeling as if he was just being executed by dismemberment. Xiao Qie hugged Shun Zichuan. Shun Zichuan's nape, which had once radiated seduction, had turned deathly pale. The man himself looked like a cloud lying across the night. Xiao Qie stayed close to him, hugging him so tightly that he hurt. Cold? Xiao Qie asked in a whisper. Shun Zichuan was a little slow to react as he nodded his head. He tilted his head, pressing his cheek against Xiao Qie's cheek. That heat warmed him up, making him seem a little more human. He reached out his hand in the darkness to stroke Xiao Qie's arm, feebly and slowly. Xiao Qie turned his hand around to hold Shun Zichuan's hand, interlocking his fingers tightly with Shun Zichuan's. He gave all his warmth to Shun Zichuan. His chest, being the most scalding, pressed against Shen Zichuan's back, as if he could dissolve Shen Zichuan away with the heat. He seemed to be harboring Shen Zichuan in his arms, no longer permitting anyone to get close. He clumsily licked Shen Zichuan's wound. This was his way of healing. He did not want this person to be in pain ever again. Qiao Qianya has gone to look for Shifu. Shen Zichuan's eyes were dark and gloomy. When will he be back? Soon. Xiao Qia squeezed Shen Zichuan's hand and repeated, soon. Shen Zichuan said, I can't wipe the blood clean. Xiao Qia said, we have both embarked on the way of the Azura One, the bloody path of carnage. We have no more need to be clean, as long as we're together. Shen Zichuan pursed his thin lips slightly and said, I. He paused, dazed, as if he had forgotten what he wanted to say. Listening to the sound of the rain, he closed his mouth again. Xiao Qia pinched his tightly clenched mouth open and asked, What do you want to say to me? Shen Zichuan turned his head hastily, refusing to let Xiao Qia look at him squarely in the face. But Xiao Qia grasped him by his jaws to prevent him from dodging and asked once again in a lowered voice, What do you want to say to me? Shen Zichuan's face was pale under that gaze. He opened his mouth several times, but could not bring himself to speak. Xiao Qia gazed at him, until a long time later when he finally heard Shen Zichuan say with a sob, It hurts. Xiao Qia cupped Shen Zichuan's cheeks and raised his face. Shen Zichuan looked as if he had returned to the time when he was a child. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he repeated, It hurts, over and over again with his lips trembling. Xiao Qia stroked Shen Zichuan's hair and wiped his tears with his thumbs. He said, Where does it hurt? Tell me all about it. Shen Zichuan broke out into sobs. Even his shoulders were trembling. He was so grief-stricken as he cried, as though he was venting all these years of anguish in this one night. But he was dumb. He did not know where he was hurting. He clearly could no longer endure this kind of pain anymore. He disconsolately let Xiao Qia wipe his cheek. Tears brimmed in his eyes. There was nothing left of all those machinations that spoke of a maturity far beyond his age, only naked pain. Xiao Qia rolled over and embraced Shen Zichuan. He took all of Shen Zichuan into his arms, providing a haven where Shen Zichuan could remove his mask. They hugged each other tightly. Xiao Qia listened as Shen Zichuan cried himself hoarse, like a small animal that had been abandoned, and at the same time, like a battered child who was broken and bleeding. Gradually, Xiao Qia's chest was soaked through. He caressed Shen Zichuan's hair, answering again and again, It won't hurt anymore. I promise. Lanzhou will never hurt again. Chapter 98, On the Run. Chapter 98, On the Run. The rain stopped at the crack of dawn, where heaven and earth appeared like a vast, murky expanse under the intersection of light and darkness. Qi Juin trod on muddy water and withdrew from the military grounds. She secured her armed guards and looked at her own deputy general riding his horse into the camp. Her deputy general's name was Qi Wei, a strong and sturdy man who was also cautious by nature. He could hoist an axe on the battlefield and hold a needle off the battleground. He was a man of prestigious standing among the troops in the army. Qi Wei dismounted midway and hastily nodded in acknowledgement to the soldiers at the sides of the road who were paying their obeisances to him. He headed straight to Qi Juin's side and said, Commander-in-Chief, we've received news. Kudu or Bianjuan? Qi Juin asked. Both. Qi Wei was not a tall man. He looked around and reported, Kudu was caught in a sudden bout of rain and got completely washed out. The second young master of the Shao clan fled in a hurry with 20,000 Imperial Army soldiers and have already arrived at the border of Zhongbua. Looks like he's going to Cizhou. Qi Juin was not at all alarmed. She tightened her arm guard and let out a vague smile as she bit down on the rope and said, That lad sure runs fast. First there's the case of the military provisions, and now there's the encirclement of Xiao Qia with the intent to kill. The Prince of Li Bei will no doubt fly into a rage this time. Following Qi Juin as she walked, Qi Wei said, If Li Bei revolts, we will have to set up additional garrison troops in the 6 prefectures of Zhongbua. The Zhongbua troops will also fall under the Commander-in-Chief's command and governance. Qi Juin put on her outer garment and said, Zhongbua is such a big place. Even if they transfer them all under my command, I wouldn't dare to accept. Kudu's matter is of no urgency. Tell me first, what exactly happened to the garrison troops of Bianjuan Commandery? Lu Guangbai fought an ambush all the way into the Biancha's home state? A hesitant expression materialized on Qi Wei's rugged face. He said, Commander-in-Chief, General Lu disregarded military orders this time and chased the Biancha cavalry across the border. I suspect. He fell silent and did not voice that word out. Qi Juin said, the military provisions this year have been reduced by half. It'll be tough for Bianjuan to hold out based just on that. I signed a memorandum of debt with the Yen clan of Hezhou under father's name. The money is meant to be set aside to buy grains for the Bianjuan garrison troops. So what's with this suspicion you're telling me about? I will not listen to a word without proof. Qi Wei knew that Qi Juin valued her generals and had always been fair in meting out rewards and punishments. She would never trample upon them because of a mere few words. But it was also because he noticed something odd when he went to Bianjuan to scout this time that his suspicions were aroused. Not daring to hide it, he truthfully said, Commander-in-Chief, I wouldn't dare to say a word if I had no proof. The purpose of this trip to Bianjuan is to investigate military intelligence from a few days back. But not only did General Lu not return to camp, he even transferred away the garrison troops at the fire beacon towers. Qi Juin stopped in her tracks. She looked at Qi Wei and asked, He transferred away the garrison troops at the fire beacon towers? Qi Wei nodded. He was just about to go into details when he heard a commotion at the side. Both of them turned aside and saw a whole new bunch of people clustered around a sedan with embroidered borders pouring into the camp. They were stopped by the guards. On hearing that the guards were adamant about not letting them enter, Ingshi could not help but lift the curtain personally and said in a shrill voice, Don't you know who I am? What is there to stop my sedan? I'm the army inspecting censor His Majesty in Kudu dispatched over. Go announce my arrival, quick. Tell Commander-in-Chief Qi that I have something important to tell her. Qi Juin watched from afar and said to Qi Wei, Go tell him that I'm busy and don't have the luxury of time to see him. All these eunuchs from Kudu are the same. Just offer him good food and wine and tell him to keep his mouth shut and not cause trouble. I'm going to the Bianjuan commandery now. Lu Guangbai is not one who will turn deserter. Before I return, tell those from Kudu that I'm not around. It's troubled waters over there. Keep a close watch on Father too. If he sends a message to Kudu, intercept it and tell him to behave himself. Qi Wei had more to say, but Qi Juin had already flipped atop the horse. Before she left, she looked back and said to Qi Wei, Kudu's matter needs at least half a month to be settled. No doubt the wedding next month has to be delayed. Remove all those red silks at home first. They all cost money. Without further ado, after saying her piece, she led the men to skirt around Ingshi's sedan and headed right for Bianjuan commandery. Shun Zichuan drank the medicine, and his illness gradually showed signs of improvement along the way. The Imperial Army was to continue moving in the northeast direction. They had to think of a way to convince Cizhou's prefectural prefect, Zhou Gui, to let them pass through, but before that they still had to shake off those pesky and persistent troops pursuing them. Han Jin is the one in hot pursuit behind us. Tantai who carried his blade and sat all huddled up on the rock. If we can't repel him back before we arrive at Cizhou, then he will use the deployment order to force Zhou Gui to seal off the city and trap us within Zhongguo with our retreat paths all cut off. Xiao Qia folded his arms and said nothing. There was a rudimentary map before him. Xiao Qia was not at all afraid of coming to blows with Han Jin, but he had to consider the timing too. The longer this drags on, the less advantageous it would be to the Imperial Army. It was only because Kudu was presently in a state of chaos due to the lack of imperial air that Qi Juin had not deployed troops to encircle and take him down. By the time things settled down in Kudu and Kudu had a hand free to mobilize Qi Juin to pursue and capture them, these 20,000 soldiers of the imperial army would be on a collision course with a wall of metal armors. That hard part is not in fighting, but in the speed of battle. Shen Zichuan's pale face had yet to recover its rosiness. He picked up a stone and drew a few lines on the ground. Han Jin dared to chase us this far because there is Danqing behind him. To the 8 great training divisions in his hands, the granary of Danqing is just like a wide-open door. They don't have to worry about food and clothing. Our 20,000 men ran all the way here in one breath without stopping. We have no army provisions to sustain us. If we want to get to Libei via Cizhou, then we must first resolve this issue. Tantai, who was still not used to looking at Shen Zichuan face to face. He presently fell silent for a moment, then looked at Xiao Qie. Without looking at him, Xiao Qie said, "Spit it out if you have something to say." Tantai, who changed his sitting posture. Pointing at the ground with his finger, he said, "Cizhou and us are old acquaintances. Can't we get Zhou Gui to let us borrow some food for emergency use first with the excuse that there was a delay in them getting the news?" "No." Shen Zichuan let go of the stone. At this juncture, all the actions taken implies the taking of sides. Zhou Gui may not have the intent, but as long as he does it, then in Kudu's eyes, he is a traitor who provided aid to the rebel forces. After we pass through Cizhou, he will be taken into custody in Kudu to be impeached and punished. Zhou Gui has a family. He won't do this. Ding Tao looked up from his book and said, "Qinji went to make arrangements for the military provisions, didn't he? He must be rushing on his way back to us now." The military provisions he prepared have already been dispatched to Libei. It's Libei armored cavalry's food at the front line. There isn't that much surplus left to fill the stomachs of the imperial army. Xiao Qie squatted down and examined the map. Even if he and Gu Jin come, they won't be able to bring much food. As the saying goes, food and fodder should go before troops and horses. Back then, Libei and Qidong were able to swiftly beat back the Bianxia cavalry because the Bianxia cavalry had no reserve supplies and could not afford to fight a war of attrition. And now the imperial army, caught in a dilemma and sandwiched here, similarly could not afford to fight a war of attrition either. Striking Cizhou down might be an option, but it was definitely a bad one. They had successively spent close to 100,000 taels of silver on Cizhou to foster a mutual relationship with Zhou Gui to look out for one another, and that had been done as a safeguard for the future. Turn back and attack Danqing. Tantai, who pondered it over. Danqing has a granary. We won't linger for long in the city. Just take the grains and leave. We can negotiate everything else with Zhou Gui when we arrive at Cizhou. No. Shen Zichuan let out a soft sigh. Danqing has direct military routes to Chuanqing and Kudu. Turning back is to give Kudu time to dispatch the remaining 8 great training divisions. The journey back will take up our time and sap us of energy, and we might not necessarily be able to take down the city swiftly either. It was humiliating for Tantai, who to have both of his proposals vetoed by Shen Zichuan. He rubbed his hands together and said nothing more. His elder brother, Tantai Long, was a brave man who was also a general, but Tantai who had no one to teach him. At this moment, he was feeling embarrassed and awkward, but he was pretty much convinced deep down. He was not an unreasonable man. At the very least, he was willing to admit that he was a bore. Xiao Qie seemed to have an insight into Tantai whose mind. He lifted a hand to pat Tantai who on the back and said nonchalantly, "There may be a time constraint for counterattacking Danqing, but it is an idea. You have only fought once in the past with the 8 great training divisions on the streets of Kudu. Now that you've left Kudu, just ask away if there's something you don't know. In the future, there will be plenty of moments where you will be needed to lead the troops and make decisions, and you won't have His Excellency Shen around every time to give you pointers. Laohu, the sea of learning knows no bounds. It is with the willingness to take a tumble and have fun in spite of it that you will have a bright future ahead of you. With the muddy soil on the ground already drawn into a mess, Shen Zichuan looked up at the sun and said, Han Jin is a descendant from Kudu who usually only rides horses on the hunting grounds. So he won't be able to catch up to us for the time being. We can plunder Han Jin's food provisions with an ambush here. Xiao Qia surveyed the surroundings. We won't even need 20,000 men. He's afraid of you. Shen Zichuan's fingertips were stained with a bit of mud. He said, he has been hesitant and timid in his pursuit of us all this while. To let him fall for the ambush, we will need a bait first. I'll lead 500 people to wait here for him. There is a river of silt to the east, backed by mountains on both sides and close to the forest on one side. Laohu will lead 2,000 people to lay in ambush there. Xiao Qia wiped the mud away from Shen Zichuan's fingertip. Ding Tao will bring some men to the town along the way tonight for food and wine. Say that the imperial army has fled here, and they are all demoralized because I'm too poor to buy grain and I can't get out of Zhongbua either, resulting in many of them turning deserters. Han Jin was young, and he had interactions with Xiao Qia during the time the public ditches were clogged. Shen Zichuan was right. He was indeed afraid of Xiao Qia. In fact, there were very few among the noble young masters in Kudu who were not afraid of Xiao Qia. Xiao Qia's physique and character had already made him a veritable tyrant long before the autumn hunt. The Nanlin hunting grounds was a watershed. With their fathers and elder brothers looking out for them, it would be a breeze for direct descendants like Han Jin, who were not the eldest sons in their family, to enter officialdom. They seemed no different from Xiao Qia, yet they had never stood out the way Xiao Qia did. Perhaps he would pursue Xiao Qia with caution because of his misgivings of the latter, but he would definitely not pass up the chance to defeat him, as long as Xiao Qia showed him a weakness. Other than these, Shen Zichuan considered it for a moment and said to Ding Tao, "You also have to say that I don't get along with the Marquis and have had so many disputes with him on the way that we are going our separate ways. We are in a difficult position both internally and externally." Xiao Qia bared his teeth. "Make it out to be as tragic as you can." Ding Tao swiftly took notes in his book. Not feeling reassured, Tantai Hu asked, "Can Taozi act? Say it once for us here first." Ding Tao rubbed his eyes and held up the book with both hands to read. "My master is in such a miserable state, doomed as he was by those people. The 8 great training divisions keep pursuing us relentlessly like dogs, so much that my master doesn't even have money for porridge. When we left Kudu, we were fleeing for our lives, so we didn't have time to pack up all those manors and shop, and we didn't even take the money in the residence. Our pockets are now as empty as sheep poop. Master even owes the ear ornaments shop at Shenwu Street several thousand taels of silver, and there's no way he can pay it back now. His Excellency Shen fell severely ill after getting caught in the rain, but we have no money to call for a physician. Alas, a poor coup, His Excellency has forsaken my master too. Our soldiers and horses are now on the run on empty stomachs. I'm too hungry. I'm so hungry that I'm regurgitating bile. I really can't take it anymore, so I took a few brothers to rob some houses along the way to cobble together some money for ourselves. We were originally all good men from decent families, and it's all because we followed the wrong person that we were forced into such a corner. Now we are filling up our tummies a little before we continue on our way to seek asylum with Han Jin in Danqing. Han Jin is good. He has money and grains. It's only by throwing in with him that we will have a future. The future is," Ding Tao read with great emotion and feeling. "This master thinks that was pretty well said." Xiao Qia commented, "Laohu, strip off his little robe and smear mud all over his face. Then give him 3 strings of copper coins and hurry him on his way. There's no need to eat and drink in a tavern anymore, just beg for alms along the streets in the town. What are you looking pitifully at Lanzhou for?" Chapter 99. Thank You Gift. Chapter 99. Thank You Gift. Han Qing captured several deserters from the Imperial Army one after another. All of them were covered in filth, and were so starved that they looked sallow and emaciated. After making several inquiries, he found out about the predicament the Imperial Army was in, but still, he did not dare to act rashly and advance his troops without careful consideration. This was because a 20,000 men strong Imperial Army was not a small number. He was continually weighing his chances of winning against Shao Qie in a head-on battle. The Imperial Army's performance at the Nanlin hunting grounds was out of the ordinary. They killed many a number of people when they vied with us for the city gate patrol back then. Han Jin sat inside the tent and looked at the deserters below. Now that you people have followed Shao Qie into defecting from the capital, how can you simply just break up at the drop of a hat? To reply, Your Excellency, we can't go far. The army deserter who was kneeling at the foot of Han Ji's seat said, We fled all the way here, far away from civilization with no villages or shops in sight. We have no food nor camping site. Suzhou lies ahead of us, and there's also the Qidong garrison troops if we look south. It's obvious we are going to be caught in an encirclement like a dumpling being wrapped. Han Qing thought it over for a moment carefully and asked, Are there many deserters? The deserter said, When I fled, there were about a few hundred. The Imperial Army is now like duckweeds in a muddy ditch that will scatter at just one strike. It won't be able to withstand a blow. Han Jin wondered, and Shao Qie didn't think of a way? I heard that he strictly enforces military law. The soldiers under his command are all very afraid of him. Your Excellency doesn't know this, but, having spoken for so long, the deserter swallowed his saliva and said, Can you give me some rations first? I fucking ran for the entire way, and I'm now so starving I can't explain it clearly. Han Jin motioned for the men to give him some rations, and the deserter began to gobble it down on the spot. As he chewed on his food, he said, They are afraid of him. In the past, we brothers had nowhere to go in Kudu, and so we had no other choice but to follow him, and we ended up offending the various masters of the 8 great training divisions. Now that he even went on to become a traitor, how would we still dare to continue following him? Han Jin noted that all these deserters did indeed seem to be down and out. What's more, they were captured back. It did not look like they were faking. He could not help but make some mental calculations carefully in his mind. First, he got the men to take the deserters out. Then he began to deliberate over the battle strategy in his tent with his advisors. Among the advisors was a man called Gao Zhongxiong, who had been the person taking the lead back then when the Imperial College had stirred up a disturbance. As he had offended Pan Rugi, and was thrown into prison with no one to vouch for him, he gave up the idea of an official career and threw in his lot with Han Jin. He was a high-spirited scholar full of patriotic fervor who abhorred traitors to the state all his life. Xin Wei, Pan Rugi, and the likes were all men he held in contempt. And now, hearing that Shao Qie had fled the state after carrying out an assassination, he was even more worked up, unable to condone it. Gao Zhongxiong pointed at the map and said, Since Shao Qie is already at the end of his rope, we cannot tolerate him being on the run within Zhongbua's territory. The viceroy has a strong army with sturdy horses and Danqing to fall back upon. In my view, there's no time to lose. We will be able to deploy troops to pursue and attack him shortly. As long as he is captured before he enters Suzhou, it'd be a meritorious service rendered. Han Jin was still hesitating. He said, But Shao Qie still had more than 10,000 men, and they are all real men who have been through the Nanlin hunting grounds incident. If there's a trap, Gao Zhongxiong did not think the same. He said, The soldiers of the Imperial Army are demoralized, and they are all not of one mind. There's no difference between 10,000 men and one man. They are now just a motley crew of disorganized men. They are nothing to worry about. The viceroy had already pursued him all the way here. If we can't capture him as soon as possible and bring him to justice, we won't be able to account for it to Kudu either. Pretty much stirred, Han Jin asked, "What should I do if he's in cahoots with the prefectural prefect, Zhou Gui, to hatch a plot to do me harm?" Gao Zhongxiong said with slight urgency, "Viceroy, that Zhou Gui is a man with a family. Would he cast aside a decent official position to plot a revolt with the traitor Xiao Qia? He won't dare to. If we dispatch troops now, we will definitely catch Xiao Qia by surprise. Then we can follow up the victory and press home the attack, and we will be able to return in triumph." Han Jin had been sleeping in the tent for days in a row and was already displeased from all the mosquitoes and bugs' bites over his body. He was still thinking of Kudu, where his eldest brother, Han Qing, had aided the Empress Dowager in gaining charge of the government. The glorious rise of the Han clan was right before him. It was just the perfect time for him to return and call up his friends and associates for a lavish celebration. The longer he stayed here, the more irritable he became. So right after hearing Gao Zhongxiong's words, he weighed over the pros and cons and promptly agreed. The next day, Han Jin woke up early and led the troops onwards while there was still dew outside. Using the information provided by the deserters, he followed the trail to the forested area outside the river of Silt. There were earthen stoves dug all over the forest, but not in a way that could provide food for 20,000 people. Han Jin thoroughly believed the deserters' words now. With his spirits soaring, he drew his blade from where he was on his horse and brandished it forward, saying, "The traitors have no way out now. Search the forest all over. We will surely find their traces." The soldiers of the 8 great training divisions surged forth. Xiao Qia was squatting by the stream, washing his face. On hearing sounds, he looked back just in time to see Han Jin spurring his horse over. The moment Han Jin saw Xiao Qia, he hurriedly bellowed, "The traitor is here. Catch him quick." Xiao Qia whistled to summon Lang Tao Xuejin. The smattering of 500 men all seemed to be in a panicked fluster, shouting and yelling as they were chased through the forest. On seeing the situation, Han Jin could not help but get all fired up. He laughed out loud a few times, then shouted from afar, "Your lordship, to think you'd fall into such a state today." Xiao Qia ignored the soldiers and fled away alone on his horse. Han Jin was afraid he would make his escape and hurriedly led his men in hot pursuit. The 8 great training divisions charged through the forest, following Han Jin towards the northeast at full throttle. The more Han Jin ran, the more anxious he became. He shouted after him from behind, "Xiao Qia, you're already at a dead end. Surrender yourself quickly." Xiao Qia looked back on horseback and led his men in an attempt to resist, but they were no match for the 8 great training divisions' ferociousness. The sight of the 500 men being chased was a sorry sight to behold. In the blink of an eye, they had already fled out of the forest. They made a beeline towards the river of Silt, where they were finally boxed in at the side of the river. "Xiao Qia." Han Jin reined in the horse and waved his sleeve. "Look around you. It's all soldiers from my 8 great training divisions. You're currently besieged and under attack on all sides. So what are you still struggling for? Beg for mercy now, and I'll spare your life." Lang Tao Xuejin dug its hooves where it stood. Xiao Qia said frostily, "You want me to die, sure. I'll just ask you one question. Why didn't Han Qing come himself today? My eldest brother is currently the noble regent, with weighty and taxing official duties to attend to. How would he come here to deal with you?" Han Jin pointed at Xiao Qia with his sword. "If you get off your horse to await capture, your Xiao clan will still have a slim chance of survival. You alone committed such a heinous and grave mistake, yet you are willing to let your entire family pay for it with their lives now? I've indeed made many mistakes." Xiao Qia nodded slightly and looked askance at Han Jin, "But it's not your Han clan's place to talk about it with me." The moment the words left his mouth, several hundreds of people suddenly climbed to their feet from both sides. Tantai, who took the lead and completely surrounded Han Jin from behind. Leading the soldiers from the back, he slashed away at everyone he saw, throwing both men and horses off their feet into utter confusion and a crushing defeat. Han Jin's guards on his left and right were all imperial bodyguards whom Han Qing had assigned over to protect Han Jin. On seeing this, they realized that they had fallen for the trap and immediately raised their whips to whip Han Jin's horse in an attempt to lead him to break out of the encirclement from the side of the forest. Where had Han Jin ever seen such a battle array before? He was pretty much an expert when it came to past military exercises held at the Kudu military ground, but he had never truly fought a war before. He was already totally frightened out of his wit. The pain jerked the horse into action, and it broke into a mad dash towards the periphery of the encirclement in the forest, with the imperial bodyguards forming a protective circle around it. With his blade in hand, Sun Zichuan stood in the shadows of the tree and looked at Han Jin. Han Jin still wanted to charge on ahead, but a sharp-eyed imperial bodyguard deftly reined in the horse. Under cold sweat and fresh blood, the group of people exchanged eye signals with each other. Eventually, the man at the head spoke, "Vice Commander, it's affinity that leads us to encounter each other today. How about letting us go on account of our past comradeship?" Sun Zichuan had lost a lot of weight in the past few days. The wrist bones on the hand he was grasping the blade with looked just like a crescent moon peeking out in an icy-colored arc from that plain white sleeve opening of his. His eyes seemed to harbor solid ice that never melted throughout the seasons, yet a smile infused with the warmth of spring gradually materialized on his face. He said, "I do understand that the various brothers have been entrusted by another with this mission and, therefore, had no choice but to do it." That man knew Sun Zichuan was malicious and ruthless by nature. So when he saw him reveal a smile, he shielded Han Jin and took a few steps back instead. The thunderous sound of fighting and killing filled the air behind him. Xiao Qia was also closing in on them, one step at a time. Sweat trickled down the man's temples. He said, "Your Excellency has a bright future ahead of you, so why follow a traitor and suffer untold hardships here? If you are willing to release Viceroy Han back to the capital, the Commander-in-Chief will definitely forgive and forget past grudges and welcome you back to the capital." Unexpectedly enough, Sun Zichuan chuckled. His voice was clear and unhurried, and he was a pretty sight to behold when he smiled. That pale skin of his looked extraordinarily delicate under the speckles of sunlight. Very slowly, he drew out his blade, scraping Yang Shan Shui's slender and long blade against its sheath. "I'm very grateful to Han Qing." Sun Zichuan backhandedly grasped hold of the hilt and paused. "Words cannot express the extent of my gratitude towards him. When you return this time, please bring him a thank-you gift on my behalf." Han Jin felt a chill on his back and nearly tumbled off his horse. Xiao Qia rinsed away the blood on the blade at the edge of the water. Sun Zichuan squatted at the back to clean his hands. He buried his entire palms into the stream. Even when Xiao Qia was done washing his blade, Sun Zichuan did not remove them. Xiao Qia squatted opposite Sun Zichuan. He was much taller than him, but he could still put his head against Sun Zichuan's. Both men's palms met in the water, and Xiao Qia grasped hold of his fingertips. Sun Zichuan's sobs seemed to be a dream of the night, seeing as how he was clean and composed under the sunlight. Very slowly, his index finger stroked along Xiao Qia's hand and made its way through the gap between Xiao Qia's fingers. His palm fitted into Xiao Qia's palm, bringing along with it the icy-cold softness of the water current. Tantai, who was presently leading the men to clean up the battlefield. They still had to stay over for a night in this forest. There were soldiers not far away all around them, but Sun Zichuan's hand clung to his, as if he was nonchalantly playing with it. At the same time, it also seemed like a seduction long premeditated. He still had the stench of blood on him. Xiao Qia let him do as he wished and said, "You left only one soldier alive and sent him back. He might not necessarily be willing to bring the message back to them." Sun Zichuan looked at the shimmering surface of the stream and said, He's an imperial bodyguard. As long as he is still alive, he has to complete the mission. Han Jin has fallen into our hands. If he doesn't bring news of it back, then he has failed in his mission. He's going to die anyway, might as well die with a little more dignity. Furthermore, the heads in that burlap sack are all those of imperial bodyguards on the job with a waste token. He has to bring his brothers home. Xiao Qie wanted to wipe away the droplets of blood on Shen Zichuan's wrist, but there were people all around. Both of them gazed at each other for a moment. He suddenly grasped Shen Zichuan back, then slowly leaned forward and said, "The earring dropped in Kudu. I'll make a new one for you once we arrived in Libei. You still have an outstanding bill of several thousand taels of silvers." Shen Zichuan looked at him. "Tighten your belt and make some money first, Ergongzi. I can marry into a rich family. Pledge myself in marriage in exchange for money." Xiao Qie lowered his voice. Propping himself up against the soft sediment at the bottom of the stream, Shen Zichuan whispered into Xiao Qie's ear, 500 taels for one night. That bit of enchanting sensuality had yet to pervade the atmosphere between them when Shen Zichuan suddenly looked back with a stern countenance and said to Tantai who had wanted to go over but did not know what posture he should adopt to walk over, "Han Jin must not have brought plenty of provisions along this time, considering that he had been thinking of going back to Kud as soon as possible, and that he had dancing to fill in whatever he was lacking. Have everyone cook all those provisions tonight. Tomorrow morning we—" Shen Zichuan stopped abruptly for a moment. He swiftly cast a sidelong glance at Xiao Qie before he continued, "We'll continue on our way to the northeast." Xiao Qie said nothing and washed the handkerchief in all seriousness, all the while conveniently caressing Shen Zichuan's hand that had been covered under the handkerchief until it turned a shade of light red. Chapter 100. Hidden Danger. Chapter 100. Hidden Danger. News of Han Jin's rash advance made its way back to Kudu, causing quite the stir. Because the only surviving imperial bodyguard brought back a sack of human heads, making it clear to all that Shen Zichuan and Xiao Qie had completely split from Kudu. There was no longer a glimmer of possibility that both sides could sit down for negotiation. Han Jin's capture threw Han Qing into a rage. When Shen Zichuan left Kudu, the imperial bodyguards were already falling apart. The imperial bodyguards led by Gu Qingqing were still in Jueshi looking after the Shi clan, and Fei Xing had gone into hiding with his own trusted men. Han Qing did not have much manpower left on hand. The imperial bodyguards were at the height of power and the peak of glory under Ji Wufan's command. By the time the command fell to Ji Lei, it was already on the decline. And now, in Han Qing's hands, it had thoroughly turned into an utterly fractured squad of ceremonial guards. The batch of men under Fei Xing's command were all capable men, but Han Qing's premature exposure of his intent to kill Fei Xing had consequently caused him to miss the chance to win Fei Xing over to his side. Once the overall situation has stabilized, the 12 offices of the imperial bodyguards will have to be reorganized. Our lack of current manpower is really a disgrace, and we can't get anything done with this few people. Han Qing sat at the right-handed seat below the Empress Dowager and said in a steady voice, "I noticed that the noble clan's descendants are mostly in positions with practically no obligations lately. Giving them a place to go would also prevent them from recklessly stirring up trouble at this crucial juncture." The Empress Dowager wore a crown of jade, with her hair tidily worn in a bun and her sideburns trimmed. Pendant earrings inlaid with gold and gems dangled at the sides of her ears. She was really suited to dressing in such an elegant and poised manner, just like how a peony ought to be grown in the main halls of the nobles. Only gold and jade in its glorious splendor was worthy enough for a divine beauty of this caliber. She was already beyond her prime, yet her graceful demeanor was far from diminished. At present, she was holding a wooden spoon, teasing the parrot. Without even looking at Han Qing, she said, "The Imperial Bodyguards is a place where serious work is done. It's already providing for many hereditary descendants of the noble clans. Keep stuffing more people inside, and it will be rendered useless sooner or later. The 8 great training divisions suffered a defeat in the battle outside Danqing. If you ask me, it not only needs an infusion of new blood, but also a dismissal of some old-timers. It was precisely at the behest of someone else that Han Qing was thinking of finding decent posts for the young masters of the noble clans. On hearing this, he said, "I have the same intent. I'll discuss it over with the Ministry of War tomorrow and write a memorial to submit to the Grand Secretariat. Your Majesty, that Hai Liangyi is so sick that he can't even straighten his back. He has been toiling hard his entire lifetime for state affairs. At the very least, we mustn't let him exhaust himself to death while on the job. We need to come up with an arrangement for him." By this, he meant for Hai Liangyi to be relieved of his post and sent back to his hometown. With a smile on her face, the Empress Dowager tapped the wooden spoon and handed it over to Matron Liuxiang, who was serving at the side. She said to Han Qing with an amicable countenance, "What he has is an affliction of the heart for which he has yet to regain his footing. He's still the one who understands many of the 6 ministries' affairs best. How can we rashly dismiss him back to his hometown at such a crucial time? Let's wait for a few more days." Han Qing, having been tactfully rebuffed, gnashed his teeth inwardly, although he kept his expression unchanged on his face and said, "Your Majesty is the one leading the administration now, so naturally, Your Majesty is the one who decides. Since the 8 great training divisions have been defeated before the city of Danqing, and Shao Qie has already fled to Zhongbua, then it'd be better for the Ministry of War to mobilize the Qidong garrison troops to stop them as soon as possible. Otherwise, the Libei armored cavalry would have a 20,000 men strong reinforcement by the time he returns to Libei." The Empress Dowager cleaned her hands and said, "If you had been able to stop him in Kudu, we would not have all these subsequent worries now. That prefectural prefect, Zhou Gui, knows how to do his job, and he is also caught in a tight spot. He still has to come into contact with Libei in the future, so he will definitely not offend Libei. Shao Qie's return to Libei is already a foregone conclusion. Even if we get Qi Juin to go, she'll be just fighting the Libei armored cavalry in a head-on attack. It's easy for us to talk about deploying troops here. But where are the military provisions to sustain the army as they head north? Hezhou can't bear this extra burden. Then are we just going to let Shao Qie return to Libei just like this?" Han Qing stood up in astonishment. "This will make Libei even more powerful, like a tiger that has been given wings." The Empress Dowager let Matron Liuxiang hold her for support as she stood at the entrance of the front yard to look at the beautiful flowers in a multitude of vivid colors. She asked, "Han Qing, do you think that Shao Qie will definitely be of assistance when he returns to Libei?" Han Qing put on a look as if he was listening attentively and said deferentially, "I do not understand. Please enlighten me." From the time Shao Jiming took over military power of the Libei armored cavalry from Shao Fangxiu, he used 10 years to get to where he is today. He is the heart of the Libei's military forces, one the soldiers look up to. The Empress Dowager watched as Hua Xiangyi pounced on butterflies in the garden with the maidservants, and could not help but reveal a smile. She watched for a while longer before she continued, "Shao Qie has left Libei for 6 years. His return now makes him look like a wolf pup intruding into someone else's territory. He said Kudu is not the hometown in his dreams, but he is too young to understand the implied meaning of the phrase, circumstances change with the passage of time. Leading that 20,000-strong imperial army of his, he will gradually come to realize how out of element he is in Libei. Shao Fangxiu has always taken the hard line in setting up the Libei armored cavalry under one command. This is the reason why he is still standing, but it's also going to be the reason why it will be hard for Shao Qie to fit in. In a pack of wolves feeding on meat, Shao Qie, in order to kill his way out of the encirclement to become the alpha wolf, must first have the determination to bite the former king of wolf to death. The Empress Dowager looked back and smiled at Han Qing. The Shao clan can't bear the sight of internal strife among the other clans. But sometimes there is no other choice. The Shao clan has always been a paragon of brotherly love and respect, but how long can this brotherhood last in the face of military power? The battlefield is a cruel place. It is where the blood of millions of battered soldiers is shed. But the combat zone for power is even more brutal. A change of hands often means infighting and fratricide. Han Qing indistinctly shrank under the Empress Dowager's gaze. He hurriedly lowered his head in agreement and said, "Your Majesty is wise. But Shao Jiming is already seriously injured. It's entirely justifiable for Shao Qie to stand in for him." The Empress Dowager asked, "Did Shao Jiming die?" Han Qing shook his head. The Empress Dowager said, "Shao Jiming didn't die. He can still assist and coordinate military affairs from the back, while Shao Fangxiu, with his re-emergence, can command the soldiers from the front. This pair of father and son controls the Libei armored cavalry. There are many matters in which they have to show mutual understanding in order to keep it up. But Shao Qie has both the ability to unify and coordinate military affairs and the ability to charge into battle and kill the enemies. If he barges into this equilibrium, among that extremely unified military leadership, then he will be the unforeseen event that hinders the Libei armored cavalry from having only one commander-in-chief. Maybe he doesn't have the intent to take his father and elder brother's place. But very soon, he will understand that Libei isn't as indivisible as we see it. His return is the hidden danger that will bring about Libei's split. The trajectory of such a situation was not something anyone can deliberately direct. It was something that took shape in passing based on the opportunities present. The seed had been sown the day Shao Fangxiu led the Libei armored cavalry in an attempt to take a stand against Kudu. But as for what fruit it would reap, no one knew. In this world, the common man has the worries of the common men to bear, while a talented one has the agony of the talented to endure. The Empress Dowager said calmly, "Since there is already a Shao Jiming, then why beget another Shao Qie? 6 years is not a long time, nor is it a short time, yet it's enough to change many things." The source of Shao Qie's agony in Kudu comes from the fact that he is not a man of mediocre ability. But after he returns to Libei, he will still continue to be tormented by this kind of suffering. Once this pair of role models for brotherhood realizes that killing each other is the only way out, the anguish will intensify. Whether it is Shao Jiming who gives up his position to Shao Qie, or if it is Shao Qie who excuses himself to avoid suspicion, even brothers who were once loyal and devoted to each other will grow estranged. Under the warmth of this 5th month, Han Qing felt a chill, followed by a tingle of thrill. The former emperor has already been buried. There ought to be some signs of progress for the preparation of the new ruler. The Empress Dowager said, "You said you found the imperial heir. When are you going to bring the imperial heir out for me to have a look?" Han Qing said with a slight bow, "I've already sent men to bring the imperial heir to Kudu at top speed. Your Majesty will be able to see the imperial heir in 5 days at the latest." The Empress Dowager looked at him and said, "Since you're so sure he is the imperial heir, you must have credible proof that will convince the others. The civil officials led by Hai Liangyi aren't that easy to dismiss. Han Qing, you should go and make preparations." Han Qing kept her company for a while longer, then said his farewell and left. The moment he left, Hua Xiangyi approached the Empress Dowager with a flower branch in her arms. Han Qing has never climbed this high before. Just let him in on it a little, and he lost all sense of propriety. The Empress Dowager looked in the direction in which Han Qing had left and pulled Hua Xiangyi along to stroll a few steps. What a fool that Han Jin is to be defeated in dancing. He has the timing, location, and manpower all in his favor, and he still ended up being taken captive. How can such a person take on heavy responsibilities? Han Cheng's words in the palace today are all hints for me to dispatch men to save him. Little would he imagine that they only kept Han Jin alive to threaten him with. I noticed that the commander-in-chief has been looking good lately. He doesn't even address himself as this subject when he enters the palace to pay his respects. Hua Xiangyi leaned on the Empress Dowager. Auntie, he's up to no good. Going by how early his preparation of the so-called imperial heir is, I fear he's already no longer satisfied with being the imperial bodyguard's commander-in-chief. He wants to be the prince regent. The Empress Dowager took away the flowers in Hua Xiangyi's arms. I've already made inquiries into the child he has chosen. How is that an orphan of the late emperor? It's merely a child he found from a distant relative in his native hometown. It's a tad delusional for such a lowly thing to dream of occupying the Li clan's empire, isn't it? The Empress Dowager thought for a moment. But there's really no one else at present. While both of them were conversing, they suddenly saw Fumin hurrying over. He paid his obeisance and said in an obsequious manner, "His Excellency the Assistant Minister Shui requests an audience." Tantai, who distributed the food that night. Just as Shun Zichuan expected, Han Jin had traveled light when he led the troops in pursuit of them and did not bring that much food. The imperial army, however, had gone hungry for several days. At least they could eat their fill tonight. Shun Zichuan had grown terribly thin after his teacher's passing, but this forest had been long cleared out, and there was not even a rabbit around. Xiao Qie took out the steamed bun and meat jerky he had hoarded and gave it all to Shun Zichuan, while he himself ate dry biscuits and rice water just like everyone else. I've done as per master's arrangement and sent someone to notify Zhou Gui so that he can get prepared. Tantai, who crouched down next to the fire and said, "Master will be able to go home once we make our way past Sizhou the day after tomorrow." Xiao Qie threw firewood into the bonfire and said, "Informing Zhou Gui is just to get him to play along with us. With Han Jin in our hands, he will have no other choice but to give way." This Han Jin really came at the most opportune time. Tantai, who grinned. Just the day before, we were still thinking about how to get past Sizhou, and he delivered himself right to our doorstep. Shun Zichuan warmed his hands by the fire and said nothing as he looked at the fire. Tantai, who soaked the biscuit and said, "I've eaten this kind of provision when I was a part of Dengzhou's garrison troop a few years back. Zhongbua, looking at it again now, is different from the Zhongbua of the past. I almost can't recognize it." Ding Tao poured out a bit of rice in his bowl to feed to the sparrow in his sleeve. When he heard this, he said, "It's still not too bad here. Go further east, and that's what it truly means to be totally a different sight." Ding Tao had a photographic memory. He still remembered the tragic scenes he had seen in Duanzhou and Dunzhou 6 years ago when he followed Xiao Qie and the army to clean up the mess. That year, he was only 10 years old. He had just gotten a little notebook and was just starting to take notes just like his father did. And consequently, he had nightmares the entire journey. You were merely passing by after the battle. You've never seen how Zhongbua used to look like. Tantai, who lowered his eyes to look at the soup in the bowl. I followed my parents to Dunzhou when I was a child. It was really big and almost as bustling as Kudu. The display of fireworks and lanterns during the New Year too was very beautiful, as was the Turtle Mountain lantern display. 3 people crowding and jostling with one another, so many people. Shun Wei was the Prince of Jianxing, and the Prince of Jianxing's manor was in Dunzhou. For a moment, all of them lowered their heads. No one dared to glance at Shun Zichuan, not to mention that they were also afraid of offending Xiao Qie too. These few days on the road, the imperial army had gradually come to discover the subtle and delicate relationship between Shun Zichuan and Xiao Qie. It was a completely different feeling to come face to face with it compared to when it had been merely rumors to them before. How should they see Shun Zichuan? Do they regard him as their madam, the wife of their commander-in-chief? But which household's lady could command the imperial bodyguards to raid others thrice? When he hacked off the heads of all those old subordinates who were protecting Han Jin, not one of the imperial army's military officials could bring themselves to watch. Shen Zichuan was too different from Xiaoqie. He did not look and behave like the commander-in-chief the imperial army was familiar with. He seemed to be gentle and modest, yet he rarely changed his mind during official discussions. He would even overrule Tantai Hu outright. Compared to Xiaoqie, he was a lot more cold-blooded. In the past, they all privately saw Shen Zichuan as a mere beauty, a delicate fragility that clung on to the stronghold of power. But after Shen Zichuan put on the scarlet python robe, for everything that he had once concealed was exposed to the public. He became someone different from that last remnant of the Shen clan they knew of in the past. His beauty was no longer a vision anyone could wantonly admire at will, that was an unrivaled allure that bespoke a ruthless strength. There were very few people in the imperial army who were willing to look at Shen Zichuan in the eye, other than the totally clueless Ding Tao. Even Tantai Hu could sense a certain kind of pressure. They took their orders from Xiaoqie, and they did not mind if Xiaoqie liked men, but they had to figure out what Shen Zichuan's position was soonest possible. Shen Zichuan had the might that put him on par to vie with Xiaoqie for power and authority. This was what they were most unaccustomed to these few days, the subtle fear. Xiaoqie rubbed his thumb ring gently. He was just about to speak when Shen Zichuan turned his palms over and said, "The wild herbs and vegetables in Duanzhou are delicious." The tension in the atmosphere eased a little. Sure enough, Ding Tao raised his head and said, "I heard from others back in Libei that a handful of wild vegetables in Duanzhou during the winter are as expensive as gold. I want to try them. Young master, do you eat them often? When the ice and snow melt in spring, my Shenyang would choose the most tender wild vegetables to make dumplings." Shen Zichuan replied in his usual tone. His fingertips were clean and free of dust, as if they had never been tainted with those blood stains before. He said with a smile, "I rarely eat them. That's why I remember it so clearly." Ding Tao gulped down his saliva and wrote carefully in his notebook with that bit of ink he had. "I want to eat it. We will definitely get the chance to in the future. If I note it down, I won't forget it." Tantai Hu rubbed the back of Ding Tao's head and chided him with a smile. "Grow up? What delicacy is there that you have never tasted before? To think you are still thinking about wild vegetables." Everyone laughed, and the topic of Zhongguo was thus diverted. Shen Zichuan warmed up his hands and said nothing more. At night, Xiaoqie rested his head on a stone. He had yet to fall asleep when a slightly hot oil paper stuck to his cheek. He sat up and took a sniff at it from Shen Zichuan's hands. He smiled and said, "Where did you get this bun from?" Ding Tao brought it back from the town. He said to keep it for eating. Shen Zichuan sat beside Xiaoqie. Both men sat side to side, with the already asleep forest belt at their backs, and the boundless starry sky before them. Xiaoqie opened the oil paper and pushed it towards Shen Zichuan. He said, "Then eat it. It's going to get cold if you keep it any longer." Shen Zichuan said, "I'm full. You can have it." Knowing that Shen Zichuan was keeping it specially for him, Xiaoqie took it and broke it into two, with one half in one hand for himself, and the other half in the other hand for Shen Zichuan. Shen Zichuan took a few symbolic bites and let Xiaoqie finish the rest of it. "You also have to decide whether the betrothal gift of 2 million should be taken to Libei or left in Xizhou." Xiaoqie drank the water from the water bag. "Guqingqing will surely keep an eye on the Shi clan's business for you when he receives the message. Once we reach Libei, Qiao Tianya and Qin Yang should have also hurried back too. When the time comes, we'll set up a new compound." Xiaoqie stopped, acutely sensing something off in this unusual silence. He fell silent for a moment. "Is there something you want to tell me?" Grasping the little bamboo fan that never left his side in his hands, Shen Zichuan looked at Xiaoqie out of the corners of his eyes and said, "Suan, I can't go with you to Libei." The way he spoke was so gentle. Just like that time at the top of the city gate when he had said to Xiaoqie with the same tenderness, "Suan, go home." Chapter 101 Treasure. Chapter 101 treasure Shinzichuan had, at Zhaozui Temple, received Qi Huilian's entire lifetime of knowledge. 6 years ago, when he kneeled at Qi Huilian's feet, he already knew which path he was going to take. It was in pain and anxiety that he tempered his body and spirit. He once naively thought that he could throw off the noble clan's restraints by relying on power checks and balances alone. But he failed. Shinzichuan looked ahead. The murmuring waters of the river flowed, like life that had plunged into darkness, unable to turn back, and twinkling only because of the starry sky reflected in it. He slowly nudged the little bamboo fan open, then slowly closed it up again. He said, "I left Kudu, but I'm still in a cage. This is a punishment to me for taking my chances. I have to find a new way out soon as possible. Teacher entrusted his entire lifetime of convictions to me. I once promised him to walk to the end of this battle for him. We endured it all in the past because Kudu did not seem to have reached the stage of no return yet. But now I've come to the understanding that it has long been on the decline, like the sun setting beyond the western hills." Qi Huilian shouted about the decaying empire in the heavy downpour, yet his raised arms still seemed to be trying in vain to hold up the mansion that was collapsing. One he had taken an entirely different path from Hailiangi, but yet they had both lit up the same torch. In the last moment of his life that had always blazed for the Li clan, he cast aside the crown prince whom he could never let go of in the past and chose Shinzichuan, who was of humble origins. Both of Qi Huilian's students were what the common folks called worlds apart, like clouds and mud. The crown prince was the direct descendant of the Li clan, and he seemed to be born just to be a wise sovereign. Qi Huilian thought that they could create a new world, because they were the undisputed legitimate descendants of direct lineage in this world. But then he failed. Subsequently, he found Shinzichuan in the mire. A Shinzichuan whose birth mother was of lowly birth, and whose father was defeated in battle. A Shinzichuan who was not a direct descendant. Qi Huilian chose such a Shinzichuan. This was a change of his lifelong conviction. It was a declaration that he no longer bowed to what lineage had in store for them. He wanted such a Shinzichuan to pierce through this wretched, decaying empire. "I have given up enduring it all." Shinzichuan rested his fan on his knee and turned slightly sideways to gaze at Xiaoqie. "I'm going to choose another way to fight. I want to remain in Zhongbua. You once said to Tantai who, the humiliation of our nation has yet to be redressed, and the feuds of our families have yet to be avenged. That's right, Suan, the humiliation Zhongbua has suffered should be redressed in Zhongbua itself. This is what I want to do. One day we will gallop under the skies of Libei, and that will be when I am strong and powerful enough. 2 million isn't enough to marry the wolf pup of the Prince of Libei. Such a betrothal gift is not worthy of my Xiao Suan. If I'm in Zhongbua, however, I will one day go on to be your indestructible shield." The water bag hurriedly fell to the ground, splashing water all over the ground and onto the corner of Xiaoqie's robe, wetting it. Under the soft veil of moonlight, Xiaoqie suddenly grasped hold of Shinzichuan's hand and hugged him. After a long time, Xiaoqie's hoarse voice rang out beside Shinzichuan's ear, clinging close to it, "I'll leave my back to you, and you'll leave your chest to me. We cannot do without the other. I'll choose the best horse for you in Libei. We'll build a house on the Zhongbulibei demarcation line and meet there every month. It's a must. To marry me, 2 million isn't enough. I want Lanzhao's priceless smile that even 1,000 gold cannot buy." Shinzichuan raised his hands to cover Xiaoqie's back, to embrace this captivating scent. Xiaoqie was the wind traversing across the meadow to assail and invade the turbulent river in Shinzichuan's heart, allowing him to taste the sweetness of love all over. Having lost Duanzhou and his teacher, there was not much he had left. He eventually had to stride across that ravine of unfathomable depths to become a fortress for whatever was left of these remaining treasures. Sizhou's prefect, Zhou Gui, had been busy with his official duties in recent days. He had heard that the imperial army had already passed Danqing and was on their way to Tsizhou. Because of this, he tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep all night. Zhou Gui's advisor was a man from the prefecture of Dengzhou in Zhongbua. His name was Kong Ling, and he used to be fellow students with Zhou Gui. He had prepared the wine and gotten the chef to make several refreshing cold appetizers, and now, he was sitting cross-legged on the veranda of the courtyard with Zhou Gui across the table for a drink and chat. White flowers were falling from the Chinese scholar tree in the courtyard, giving out a refreshing, sweet fragrance. "I can't sleep these few days," Zhou Gui said as he grasped the wine cup. With his sitting posture casual, Kong Ling picked up the appetizer to eat and swallowed a mouthful of pungent wine before he said, "I know. The bandits in Dunzhou have already converged into a sizable group whose force is not to be underestimated. We have no soldiers and horses, we can't afford to provoke them. But it just had to be the case that we had a bumper harvest last year. That bandit chief, Lei Changming, is eyeing the granary in our Tsizhou. All the grains have been given to the Libei armored cavalry as military provisions. The granary in Tsizhou is now empty. I wrote a letter to Duanzhou's prefect, but as you know, he's a puppet supported by Lei Changming. How would he dare to reason with Lei Changming on our behalf? I'm really suffering in silence." Zhou Gui could not even gulp down a mouthful of wine. "Then there's that second young master of Libei who rebelled and fled the capital. 20,000 imperial army soldiers are about to arrive at the foot of the city gate. Qingfeng, I'm in a dilemma. I can't let them pass, but I can't refuse to let them pass either." Kong Ling set down his chopsticks and said, "If Libei were to rebel, Tsizhou, being sandwiched in the middle, won't be able to waver for long. You have to make a decision as soon as possible." "It's not up to me to decide." Zhou Gui sighed disconsolately. "This time we are really cornered by wolves in front and tigers at the back. We can't afford to offend both Libei and Kudu, and there's still a Lei Changming at the side eyeing us covetously like a tiger eyeing its prey." Kong Ling grasped the flower of the Chinese scholar tree and tossed it in the wine. "Lei Changming is a bandit. Sooner or later, he will be besieged and annihilated. But the 6 prefectures each have their own government affairs to handle and cannot join forces to suppress the bandit. There's no knowing when the imperial court will send men over too. Seeing how Lei Changming is getting all arrogant and giving himself air day after day, he has already become the local tyrant of Zhongbua. There's no point in fretting. 6 years ago, when Bianxia cavalry breached into our territory, Duanzhou and Dunzhou were the first to bear the brunt of the attack, and became barren wastelands where bones of the dead lay exposed in the wild, and nary a rooster crowed for thousands of li to around. The ravages of war turned those thousands of li of fertile farmland into abandoned field. Who is willing to go and serve as a soldier in the garrison troop now?" Zhou Gui looked at the courtyard and raised his hand to point around for Kong Ling. "Tsizhou was able to conserve our strength and resources because the Libei armored cavalry came to the rescue at lightning speed. I've always kept this show of goodwill in mind, so I have no complaints whatsoever about the overall arrangements for military provisions this time. But plotting to murder the emperor is such a heinous crime that I can't even feign ignorance even if I want to. In less than a month, that Lei Changming will surely come to ask for grain and money, and Xiao Qie will just happen to arrive in Tsizhou. I'm really afraid there'll be a disaster when these 2 tyrants cross paths with each other. This is truly what it means by when it rains, it pours." Kong Ling drank the wine and suddenly had a brainwave. He said, "Xiao Qie brought 20,000 well-trained soldiers from the imperial army to Tsizhou. Isn't that our soldiers? With him here to personally assume command, even Lei Changming himself would have to take measure of his own abilities. The imperial army remained in Kudu all year round. When had they ever seen a real battlefield? Lei Changming overthrew the garrison battalions in the 2 prefectures of Duanzhou and Dunzhou, and he isn't afraid of the Bianxia cavalry either. What he counts on is the solidarity of the people under his command. What's more, he's familiar with Zhongguo's terrain. Even if they were to come to blows, Xiao Qie might not necessarily be his match. Zhou Gui hurriedly waved his hand. Besides, that second young master Xiao is in the prime of his youth. He hasn't fought that many battles, and he has his father and elder brother to back him. If something were to happen to him in Cizhou, I won't be able to account to Li Bei. Kong Ling stroked his goatee and said, Xiao Qie has rendered meritorious services by helping Emperor Tianqin ascend to the throne. The fact that the imperial army is willing to follow him after he rebelled and fled from Kudu means that he has the capability to lead an army. Otherwise, who would be willing to risk their heads to flee this far with him? However, seeing is believing. We'll meet him to get a proper feel of him when he comes later. I heard he's not easy to get along with. This was what Zhou Gui was worried about, and he has stayed in Kudu for a long time. If he acts all like a rich young master, then I have to hurry and think of a way to send him away. We can't afford to have him stir up trouble. A few days later, the imperial army arrived at the city walls of Cizhou as expected. Zhou Gui did not dare to let them through directly, and merely opened the gate to welcome Xiao Qie and Shen Zichuan in. He had long gotten his people to prepare a banquet, but Xiao Qie turned it down with the reason that they were exhausted from being on the go the entire way here. Instead, he got Zhou Gui to prepare a table of simple home-cooked dishes to reminisce about the past. They had never met before and had merely corresponded through letters, so what past was there for them to reminisce about? He was merely looking for an opportunity to have an in-depth negotiation. Shen Zichuan changed his clothes and stood behind the screen in the room to look at the courtyard through the window. The courtyard was full of well-tended flowers and trees. Supposedly, this was a residence used specifically for receiving guests. The unconcealable fragrance of Chinese scholar trees permeated the air, invigorating those who caught a whiff of it. Xiao Qie came in late. He was still undressing himself. Having undone half of his clothes, he leaned over the top of the screen to look at Shen Zichuan behind the screen and asked, "Can you get a clear look through the screen?" Shen Zichuan saw how easily the screen was pressed down by him and thought that this person was really tall. He said, "It's only when one sees it as if through a dream or an illusion that one's heart will be moved. It won't be such an enchanting sight anymore if seen clearly." Xiao Qie's open garment exposed half of his chest. His last piece of clothes hung uninhibitedly on him, with those firm muscles faintly visible through the screen. He was still leaning over the top of the screen. After leaving Kudu, he no longer wore a crown, yet his messy hair could not conceal how dashing he was. He seemed to be displaying more and more of his unrestrained and carefree nature the closer he was to Li Bei. What a frivolous fellow! Shen Zichuan strode closer and raised his hand to cup the back of Xiao Qie's head before he raised his head high to kiss him. Xiao Qie pinched Shen Zichuan's chin and took advantage of the fact that Shen Zichuan was shorter than him to lift him up. "Take a good look." Xiao Qie looked at Shen Zichuan's radiant lips with a watery sheen on them. "Is this not enchanting enough?" Shen Zichuan licked the sheen of water on his lips, only to make his lips even more red and moist. He said, "Still a little something missing. 500 taels for tonight." Xiao Qie moved in closer and whispered, "Satisfaction guaranteed. For, I'm afraid my delicate body can't take it." Shen Zichuan leaned back slightly. His fingertips longingly slid their way down along Xiao Qie's chest, with just the flimsy fabric of the screen separating their flesh. "Don't think so little of yourself." The expression in Xiao Qie's eyes was dangerous. "Lanzhao." Shen Zichuan withdrew his hand and said, "When we came in earlier, I saw another person beside Zhou Gui. Who is he?" "Don't recognize him." Xiao Qie nimbly changed his clothes. "Should be Zhou Gui's advisor. We'll know once we ask during the meal later. Since he did not let us through immediately, it means he still has some misgivings." Shen Zichuan watched as Xiao Qie stepped out from behind the screen, then turned his gaze back to the courtyard. When we discuss it tonight, you mustn't. Shao Qie suddenly picked Shen Zichuan up by the waist and turned a circle to press him against the wall by the side of the window. Pinning him down, he kissed him hard. Shen Zichuan lifted his arms to hang them over Shao Qie's body. The sudden and unexpected kisses disoriented him and threw his breathing into disarray. Don't abuse my power to bully them. Shao Qie's expression was serious. I know. I'll do as my wife says. Shen Zichuan was still panting for breath. Shao Qie fastened Shen Zichuan's collar for him, then brushed aside Shen Zichuan's ink-black hair to pinch his right ear. I want to hang an earring here as soon as possible and engrave my name, Shao Suan, on it. Chapter 102, Sizhou. Chapter 102. Sizhou Zhougui did as Shao Qie said and set up a tableful of home-cooked dishes in his own courtyard. Shen Zichuan, on stepping into the courtyard, found it to be quite unconventional despite its simple setup. It was close to nature, and had no valuable wares such as gold and jade. Zhougui welcomed Shao Qie and invited him to take his seat. It was presently the 6th month. The side of the small table was encircled by a cool and clear stream, with hanging branches brushing against its water. It was pleasantly cool and cheery. Zhougui did not get anyone else to serve them. Only Kong Ling remained standing in attendance by his side to pour wine for them. Shao Qie cleaned his hands and watched as the wine in the cup was gradually filled to the brim. He said, Your Excellency Zhou has truly gone to much trouble. Even the wine prepared is on horseback from Libei. I've been away from home for so many years, and it has been a long time since I last drank it. This wine was wine from the Libei armored cavalry made out of grains. It was bold and intense. Just a few sips in the snowy winter could warm the body up. The reason it was called on horseback was because more than 30 years ago on his wedding night, the Prince of Libei, Shao Fangxiu, received a military report of the Biancha's breach into the territory. With no time for him to remove his wedding outfit, he flipped onto the horse to head into the battlefield to kill the enemies. Before he set off, the princess consort of Libei, who was similarly still dressed in her wedding outfit, lifted the jar to pour wine and exchanged a cup of matrimony wine won with Shao Fangxiu, who was sitting on horseback. This was a common scene at the frontiers, but with this person being the reputable Prince of Libei, everyone could not help but lament the fact. From then on, for most of 360 days in a year, on horseback he rides, weapon in hand. Too came to be how the Libei armored cavalry was portrayed. When Zhougui saw Shao Qie looking calm and serene, some of his anxiety eased. He said, We are close to the northeast provisions bridle path. When the military provisions were being escorted for delivery last month, the army sent many jars of wine over. Your lordship is about to return to your hometown, but there is nothing good in Sizhou to entertain you with, so I can only offer you such a borrowed gift. 3 Shao Qie laughed and said, It's the local dishes that are the most flavorful. Compared to the delicacies of Kudu, this entire table of dishes shows more sincerity. There's no need for your excellency to be modest. The arrangements for matters relating to the military provisions are complex, and it's all because of your excellency's valuable assistance that Sizhou could finish sealing and loading in just a few short days. It's only fitting for me to give you a toast as a show of my appreciation. Zhougui did not dare to accept the toast, sitting down and hurriedly rose to his feet. He held up the wine cup in both hands for a toast, then drank up with Shao Qie. It was only after he was done drinking the wine that he took his seat and said, The Libei armored cavalry is fighting a battle with the Hanshi tribe at the front line, and the military provisions are crucial to their success and failure on the battlefield. What I did was merely my duty. How can it be worthy enough to have your lordship make a special point of expressing your thanks? I really don't deserve it. Although Sizhou had a bumper harvest last year, it has been continuously providing aid to Duanzhou and Libei since the start of spring. Those are all grains the commoners of Sizhou saved up. I should thank you for this. With that, Shao Chia raised his hand and slightly stopped Kong Ling as the latter moved to pour wine. He said, "Since it's a private family feast, there's no need to stand on ceremony. This gentleman, please take a seat too." Kong Ling was swift to react. He promptly bowed where he stood and sat down. "Where is Mr. from?" Shen Zichuan asked with a smile. The gears in Kong Ling's mind turned even faster. He saw Shao Chia starting to dig in, and so he knew the main negotiator tonight was this Vice Commander Shen. He bowed his head and answered, "I do not dare to be addressed as such, given that I'm merely a commoner from the countryside. I'm a native from Dengzhou. Dengzhou has no lack of talent. May I know how I should address you? My name is Kong Ling, and my humble courtesy name is Qingfeng." Kong Ling sat upright and said as he looked at Shen Zichuan, "Tantai, who of the Imperial Army, is the blood brother of a close friend of mine, Tantai Long. To think one would run into an old friend in a foreign land." Shen Zichuan turned his head to the side and said to Shao Chia with a smile, "Suen, let's get Lao Hu to meet up with Mr. Qingfeng another day. It isn't easy to have an encounter in turbulent times." He called Shao Chia Suen, and this address alone was enough for Kong Ling to re-evaluate this orphan of Shen Wei. Shen Zichuan was pretty much inconspicuous when he entered Xizhou, or rather, far less conspicuous than his mortal flesh. Kong Ling knew he was Shen Zichuan, the Imperial Bodyguard's vice commander that Emperor Tianqin personally made an exception to promote. But after leaving Kudu, Shen Zichuan lost his basis to command the world. In Kong Ling's eyes, he had no soldiers and no men. He was merely a vassal who had fled with Shao Chia to this place. But then, a vassal could never sit as equals at the same table with Shao Chia and call him by his courtesy name. Shao Chia poured wine for himself and said, "You decide." Zhou Gui cast a glance at Kong Ling, then looked at Shen Zichuan. Kong Ling stood up to toast him and said, "I've long heard of the vice commander's name. You are too kind." Shen Zichuan said, "Please sit and let's us talk as we drink." Kong Ling said, "I'm just a minor clerk under His Excellency's command. How would I dare to discuss official affairs with Your Excellency? It's already half a lifetime of blessing for me to be able to sit here and listen to your guidance with the cup of wine I've received." The corners of Shen Zichuan's lips lifted slightly. He said, "Mr. is truly too modest. I heard that you also used to be Tantai Long's advisor in Duanzhou. When the Biancha cavalry breached into our territories, Tantai Long advocated war, and you were the one who devised all his battle strategies." They had only just entered Xizhou, and they had already dug up all the inside stories. Kong Ling's heart sank. He said, "I was merely an armchair strategist strategizing on paper. A pity Tantai Long died in Shen Wei's hands." Shen Zichuan drank his wine. "And Duanzhou fell without even being attacked." Shen Zichuan said it so lightly that it was as if Duanzhou's fall was merely a stack of paper cards that had collapsed, that it was nothing worth hating, nothing worth resenting. Kong Ling's expression gradually grew glum as he remained sitting. A long while later, he forced a smile and said, "The vice commander lives a life of luxury in Kudu. How would you know the suffering of the people after the city of Duanzhou fell? White bones stretching thousands of li 5 from the Chaosha River to Dunzhou remained uncollected. It's not that big of a deal that Shen Wei was a rat who shrank from battles. But he and Shen Zhouji set up a banquet to strangle Tantai Long to death. The troops of Zhongbua suffered a defeat. I, Kong Qingfeng, was able to have a change of master and continue living. But the pro-war faction led by Tantai Long was completely wiped out. You're right. It's a pity Tantai Long died in Shen Wei's hands. He was a good man of Zhongbua." Shen Zichuan said, "Mr. had a narrow escape. With your talents and learning, you'd be able to come across a Bo 6 Sierra Leonean Leones, even if you go to Kudu. Yet you remained in Xizhou. I don't understand." Kong Ling wanted to stand up, but then he could not leave his seat arbitrarily. He could only raise his head to look at Shinzachuan and said, "The vice-commander doesn't understand." "How can you understand? The calamity that is the ravages of war came out of the blue and turned Zhongbua into a scene of devastation everywhere. But here there is no fame nor fortune here. Perhaps in the vice-commander's eyes, it is just like the scattered willow catkins in the air, but to us, Zhongbua still has hope of getting back on its feet." Shinzachuan smiled and said, "Duanzhou lost its garrison battalion, and subsequently a band of bandits proclaimed themselves king. The fields have fallen into disuse, and there's no signs of human lives beyond half a li outside the city. So is this hope you speak of exactly the opportunity to get back on its feet for the 6 prefectures of Zhongbua, or just for the single city of Cizhou? On one hand, Cizhou intends to drag out an ignoble existence with Kudu, but on the other hand, Cizhou accedes to every one of Li Bei's requests. To be such a fence-sitter, I indeed don't understand." Kong Ling suddenly rose and said, "How would you know of Cizhou's difficulties? Kudu had their hands full with internal strife after the defeat of Zhongbua's troops, and we never got a reply despite our numerous memorials to ask for help. It was His Excellency who personally handled the reclamation of the wasted field. Took 3 years before we could have this bumper harvest." "That's right. Cizhou is indeed stuck in a dilemma between Kudu and Li Bei, but Cizhou has always gone all out to help each time Li Bei is faced with a difficulty. Vice-Commander, isn't it a tad too cutting to say that Cizhou is a fence-sitter?" "It is as you said." Shinzachuan suddenly changed his expression and said with a stern countenance, "I note Cizhou has its own difficulties, so we've come for the specific purpose of talking things out with both of you. We'll go straight to the point. Your Excellency isn't willing to let the Imperial Army pass for fear of being censured by Kudu in the days to come. But with the disintegration of the current state of affairs, holding on to what is left is not the wisest strategy. Han Cheng devised a scheme to murder the Son of Heaven. The reason Suan and I left Kudu was not to flee for our lives, but to pick up the pieces. The Empress Dowager now has control over the administration of the imperial court, and the noble clans have once again sealed off the main gate of Kudu. How long can the Imperial College still thrive? Wasn't it precisely because of Hua Xiqian's perfunctory attitude back then, when Your Excellency and Mr. Qingfeng submitted repeated memorials after the defeat of Zhongbua troops, that Zhongbua has no hope of getting back on its feet? I've long heard about the bandits in Zhongbua back then, when I was in Kudu. As long as those bandits aren't eliminated, Zhongbua will remain unstable. So how are you going to continue in your plans to restore Zhongbua to its former glory? The beginning of an undertaking is full of hardships, like one driving a wooden cart in tattered clothing to blaze a new trail through the mountains and forests. 7. I very much admire both gentlemen's determination for restoration. It's just that the road ahead is difficult. So why not change your course and leave Zhongbua's affairs to Zhongbua itself to handle? Holding his wine, Zhou Gui held Kong Ling in place and said, "Since the vice-commander is so frank, then I shall not beat around the bush. It's indeed the case that I'm not willing to let his lordship pass because I'm worried that Kudu would hold us responsible and increase Cizhou's tax as a punishment. If Cizhou disregards Kudu's deployment order and acts on its own, I fear it'd be hard for us to accomplish anything in the future without support. We have no military force and no wealthy merchants to provide financial aid. Furthermore, we don't have the same level of confidence as Li Bei. The vice-commander may persuade me thus, but there is no way I can use the lives of Cizhou's commoners to take a gamble." On the contrary, Xiaoqia motioned for Kong Ling to sit. "By saying this, Lanzhou is not persuading Your Excellency to fight alone. Cizhou is close to the northeast provision's bridle path, and it has, at present, yet to establish a fully working garrison of its own. As long as Your Excellency is willing to allow my troops to come and go without obstruction, then, until Cizhou's garrison troop is formed, my imperial army of 20,000 men can take over the patrol duty in its place." Zhou Gui contemplated it in silence. Kong Ling said, "Your lordship will naturally keep your promise. But I also have to ask your lordship, if Li Bei were to revolt, the northeast provisions bridle path will naturally become obsolete. Where then will military provisions for the Li Bei armored cavalry come from in the future? Sizhou? The northeast provisions bridle path is a key route that was opened up for the specific purpose of escorted transportation after the establishment of Li Bei armored cavalry. Isn't it too much of a pity for it to go to waste just like this?" Shen Zichuan fiddled with the wine cup. The expression in his eyes was calm and unhurried. The Li Bei armored cavalry and the imperial army has a total of 140,000 soldiers and horses. The military provisions will still have to go through the northeast provisions bridle path in the future. Kong Ling exchanged a glance with Zhou Gui and said in astonishment, "Your lordship currently has the charge of regicide hanging over your head. How would the 13 cities of Jueshi still dare to prepare military provisions for the Li Bei armored cavalry again?" Shen Zichuan smiled and said, "Jueshi is Jueshi. Kudu is Kudu. Mr. Tringfeng, since I dare to say so, I naturally have my means. How about it? As long as Your Excellency Zhou is willing to let the imperial army pass through tonight, Sizhou will never have to fight alone in the future." Zhou Gui hesitated and held his voice steady to say, "I can trust his lordship's moral character, but I can't trust this rapidly changing situation. Both of you keep saying that the imperial army will suppress the bandits after passing through. But if both of you renege on your promise after the transit, then Sizhou will really be caught in a dead end with no way out." "No need to fret." Shen Zichuan put down his wine cup and said placidly, "I alone shall remain in Sizhou until the imperial army squashes the bandits. If Your Excellency still has misgivings, we can hand over our current captive, Han Jin, to Your Excellency. That way, even if we go back on our word in future, Your Excellency can use Han Jin's life as an excuse to appease the wrath of Kudu." Li Jianheng was dead, and there was still no news about a new ruler from Kudu. The region was already beginning to stir and show signs of restlessness. It was only out of fear of the Qi clan in Qidong that no one dared to follow in the wake of Li Bei and set up their own banner to stand on their own feet. But Sizhou was different. It was so close to the Li Bei armored cavalry. If it could really get the assistance of the military forces, then they would no longer need to submit to the deployment orders of the noble clans. "News of my entry into the city today has already spread to Kudu," Xiao Qie continued unhurriedly. "Whether Your Excellency let me through or not, the Empress Dowager will have misgivings of Sizhou after tonight." Zhou Gui's countenance suddenly changed. "Your Lordship, Your Excellency. You." "Besides." Shen Zichuan followed close on Xiao Qie's heels and said in a mild tone, "If both gentlemen want to establish a fully working Sizhou's garrison troop, then the most pressing task at hand is to recruit soldiers and buy horses. Sizhou relies on the farm fields to eat and make a living. There are no businesses inside and outside of Sizhou that are connected to Jueshi and the harbors. I'm afraid it will take you until several years later to achieve this aim if you just use tax money alone. I just happen to have some savings, and I'm willing to contribute whatever little I have to the best I can. So Your Excellency Zhou, can the Imperial Army leave now?" Chapter 103 Beauty. Chapter 103 Beauty. How was there still room for Zhou Gui to refuse when the words had already been laid out so clearly? Xiao Qie and Shen Zichuan had hit them right where their weakness was, using both carrot and stick. Everything they spoke about was all the most pressing issues in Sizhou at present. The private banquet could only end here. Zhou Gui personally saw both men back to their courtyard, then strolled back with Kong Ling with a lantern in hand. He asked with a worried frown, "What do you think?" Kong Ling said as he strolled, "Difficult. Both of them are tough nuts to deal with. But what they have said so far is true. At present, the Empress Dowager is in charge of the imperial court, and Secretariat Elder is old and ill. With the recent rise of disputes within the Grand Secretariat, Jiang Qingshan's transfer to the post of the Provincial Administration Commissioner of Zhongbua is no longer that certain. If they arbitrarily appoint an official from the noble clans over, then the good days in Xizhou will come to an end. That's what I think too. Basking in the aqueous moonlight, Zhou Gui contemplated it for a moment and said, I'm worried that if we agree too quickly, both of them will think Xizhou is too easy to control. But agree too slowly, and I fear that they will run out of patience and Xizhou will lose the chance to get back on its feet. It's really hard to get a measure of this. We might not necessarily be able to trick and trap Xiao Qie by playing cat and mouse with him. Kong Ling looked back at Zhou Gui. We should make up our minds on this matter as soon as possible. Dragging it on too long will only prove to be disadvantageous to us. Kong Ling was right. They could still negotiate with Xiao Qie and Shen Zichuan now because Xiao Qie was currently in a hurry to pass through Xizhou. Considering the influence of Xizhou on the Northeast Provision's bridle path, Xiao Qie and Shen Zichuan could not forcibly barge their way through, nor could they fall out with Xizhou. So, Xizhou was the one with the upper hand. But the longer Xizhou hesitated, the more it would be detrimental to Xizhou. This was because the group of bandits led by Lei Changming was a menace to Xizhou. If Lei Changming entered Xizhou's territory to plunder them, Zhou Gui would have to ask the imperial army for help. By then, Xiao Qie would trade places with Xizhou and become the one with the upper hand. Seeing how Xiao Qie isn't bothered about trifles, he shouldn't be the kind of person who will simply sit and watch from the sidelines. Zhou Gui was still hesitating. Let's wait for Kudu to make a move. How rare of you to be this muddle-headed. Kong Ling gave a long sigh. Risking all the lives in a prefecture on just an assumption that he isn't bothered about trifles. We may know a person's face, but not his heart. If they raise their prices there and then, they won't be this accommodating and open to negotiation as they are today. It's precisely because this matter concerns the lives in an entire prefecture that I'm hesitating. Zhou Gui caught up with Kong Ling in a few steps. He shook his sleeves to extend his hands out and said to Kong Ling, Qingfeng, is it really that easy to go independent and make yourself king? Think about the former crown prince. That's truly a real fall from grace. Li Bei has revolted now, but if you think about it from various angles, how is this battle an easy one to fight? It's not all that beneficial to Li Bei. They not only need to take the Bianxia cavalry into consideration, but also be on guard against Qidong's advances. If the Northeast Provision's bridle path is cut off too, then wouldn't they become a trapped beast in a cage? They can't survive for long. When the time comes, Li Bei won't even be able to fend for themselves. Then what should our Xizhou do? Won't we end up at others' mercy like meat on a chopping board? We will even have to live with the infamy of being a traitor. With matters already coming to this stage, it's impossible to think of escaping unscathed. Kong Ling said in all earnestness, You should think it over carefully again tonight. The moment Xiao Qie stepped into the room, a graceful, delicate figure walked towards him. This fair-skinned maidservant with jet-black hair worn in a bun daintily kneeled before Xiao Qie, exposing a large portion of her nape through her low neckline. Smoothing over the lock of hair at her temples, she called out in a soft voice, Your lordship. Xiao Qie did not look at her and moved to take off his outer garment. On hearing his movement, the maidservant hurriedly got up to take off the clothes for Xiao Qie. Shen Zichuan bumped into Xiao Qie's shoulder, and Xiao Qie grasped hold of him. Letting Xiao Qie support him, Shen Zichuan lifted his chin slightly and gently kicked off his shoes. Xiao Qie said, Go prepare some hot water. The vice commander is drunk. The maidservant gathered her clothes around her and bent over to pick up Shen Zichuan's shoes. But Shen Zichuan lowered his little bamboo fan to lift her face up. She did not dare to move and could only look up along the fan at Shen Zichuan. She saw that Shen Zichuan's brows were slightly knitted, yet the corners of his eyes looked as though they were soaking with wet peach blossoms that accentuated the glistening in his eyes. A sense of inferiority overwhelmed her, and she hastily averted her eyes, not daring to look right at Shen Zichuan again. Shen Zichuan said nothing. He merely took a few looks at her and moved his fan away. The maidservant deferentially put the shoes together neatly, then retreated quietly with her head lowered. Pretty! Xiao Qia waited for the door to close before he pulled Shen Zichuan closer into his arms and asked. With his fingers over the bamboo fan, Shen Zichuan did not answer and merely stepped on Xiao Qia's insteps with feet covered in clean socks. He pulled at Xiao Qia's outer garment that had yet to be taken off and moved in closer. As Xiao Qia led him, he saw the indolent expression on Shen Zichuan's face. It was a relaxed expression of one after having drunk wine. He lowered his head, wanting to kiss him, but Shen Zichuan leaned back slightly and did not let Xiao Qia kiss. The breaths of both men carried with it the sweet intensity of on horseback. All the weariness of being on the go the entire journey eased up during these few days of rest. Shen Zichuan always looked pale after leaving Kudu, but with Xiao Qia's care and affection, he began to look like a jade stone that had been warmed up by his caresses. In Xiao Qia's palms, he was both hard and hot. Kong Ling is Tantai Long's old subordinate. As long as Lei Changming is not eliminated, the anxiety in his heart will remain. Xiao Qia helped Shen Zichuan to undress. He pulled off Shen Zichuan's clothes and caressed Shen Zichuan's lower back, even though the words from his mouth were, Lei Changming is anxious to get his hands on grains. Sooner or later, he will target Xizhou. As long as the stakes are conveyed to Kong Ling, he will think of a way to persuade Zhou Gui. Shen Zichuan could not take such a strong wine like on horseback. His cheeks were flushed, but he was still gazing at Xiao Qia and listening to him seriously. Yet the expression in his eyes revealed another kind of seriousness. Letting the Imperial Army take the place of Xizhou's patrol feels a little like holding them under duress. Never mind if it's just for the time being, but if it goes on for long term, Zhou Gui will definitely not agree. It's all thanks to Ding Tao this time for finding out so quickly that Kong Ling was once Tantai Long's old subordinate. As if Xiao Qia could not read the expression in Shen Zichuan's gaze, he muttered under his breath, Shen Zichuan stood on tiptoe slightly, then dropped back down. The more calm his expression was, the more intense the scarlet grew. The potency of the wine made him sweat. Give me a kiss, Xiao Qia said in a deep voice. I did as you said today and did not bully them the slightest. Shen Zichuan clenched Xiao Qia's clothes until it was all wrinkled. He endured it for a moment, then said, I can't reach you. Xiao Qia's heart thumped, and he lowered his head once more. Shen Zichuan wanted to kiss him, so he lifted him up and said, Let's take a bath first. Shen Zichuan raised his chin high and half opened those lips moistened red by the wine. His tongue, which was wandering between his teeth, licked the corner of his parched lips. He was merely gazing at Xiao Qia like this, and he set an entire body aflame with lust, seducing Xiao Qia until the latter no longer teased him. In the past, he did not understand the air of extremely seductive allure he had about him, but with their constant intimate interactions, he seemed to have learned how to fan the flames of lust without saying a word. Zhou Gui had only just woken up the next day when he saw Kong Ling leading the maidservant in. Stunned, he said, What's going on? Didn't I tell you to stay by the Marquis's side and serve him well? The maidservant clutched her handkerchief and turned aside to hide her face as she said, Your Excellency, shouldn't one get it clear before taking appropriate actions? Who do you think is the man standing beside his lordship? I don't even dare to touch the corner of his clothes. Both of them have the hots for each other. Neither of them even looked at me in the eye. At first, Zhou Gui did not understand, but the color drained from his face soon afterward, and the handkerchief he was wiping his face with fell. He was a scholar over the age of 40 who did not even frequent the brothels. Even the running of his household was very much in order. With a concubine he took at his mother's directive. In the past, he had only heard a little about other men's penchant for men. He never expected the relationship between Xiao Qie and Shun Zichuan to be of this kind too. This. Zhou Gui wiped his face and groused to Kong Ling, "Why didn't you remind me of this? Now we have offended him through and through." Kong Ling did not look too good either as he said, "How would I know?" Both men looked at each other and sighed in unison. During the stalemate, they heard a young servant lad kneel outside the door and shout, "Your Excellency, an urgent report from last night. Lei Changming of Dunzhou has gathered 40,000 bandits and is heading towards Artsizhou." "Why are there so many people?" Zhou Gui's heart suddenly went cold. Half a year earlier, he only had about 10,000 or so people. "It's truly the case that what you fear will come," Kong Ling promptly said. "Quick, go and invite his lordship over. Tell him we agree to last night's Treaty of Alliance." Chapter 104 Elder Brother. Chapter 104 Elder Brother Lei Changming was a native of Chazhou. In his early years, he served as an armed escort with the others and carried out manual labor. He never studied or attended school. During the reign of Yongyi, the commander of the Duanzhou garrison troops took his younger sister as a concubine, and she pretty much gained favor in the commander's residence. Because of this, Lei Changming had a comfortable life for a period of time and spent all day at the gambling dens. A pity the good times did not last long. The Duanzhou commander was not a devoted man, and within a few years, he spurned Lei Changming's younger sister. With no one to repay all those debts he owed, Lei Changming could only set out once more to work as an armed escort. At the end of the reign of Yongyi, Lei Changming took on a job from the Yan clan of Hezhou. During the journey, he risked his life to fight off the robbers and protect the youngest young master of the Yan clan, Yan Heru. Consequently, he got into the Yan clan's good book. In the reign of Xianda, after the defeat of the Zhongbo troops, he used money borrowed from the Yan clan to recruit men and buy horses. He then started a mutiny against the Duanzhou garrison battalion and killed off the commander that the imperial court had appointed at that time. From then on, he became a bandit of Duanzhou. Lei Changming initially only had a few thousand men, but with the imperial court's passive course of action after the defeat of the troops, Zhongbo was never able to recover from the heavy blow. People who were reduced from being commoners to being bandits increased, and he gradually became an overlord of sorts in Duanzhou. To date, the troops under his command had already far exceeded the numbers of garrison troops, soldiers in the various Zhongbo prefectures. Half a year earlier, Lei Changming had a total of 14,000 people or so in the prefectures of Duanzhou and Dunzhou. Zhou Gui held up his sleeve and pointed at the map for Xiaoqie. He used Mount Luo between Duanzhou and Dunzhou as his base camp and established his own nest of brigands. When the imperial court rebuilt the garrison troops of Dengzhou, they once tried to besiege Mount Luo, but they always returned empty-handed the few times they tried. Thus, they gave up, and no one bothered about it anymore. As Xiao Qie secured his arm guards, he leaned partially against the table to look at the map. He said, "He's bringing 40,000 people to Cizhou. No doubt he still has to leave behind enough men and horses to keep guard at Mount Luo. So it seems that he has at least 60,000 soldiers and horses. This number is 2 Qidong commanderies' garrison troops worth of men." Although Xiao Qie had no intent of blaming anyone, he still made Zhou Gui sweat. This was because the 6 prefectures of Zhongbo all fell under the jurisdiction of legitimately appointed prefectural prefects, and yet, in the span of 6 years, they simply just watched the bandits grow in dominance until they were on the same scale as a regular army. Although His Excellency has no dealings with Duanzhou and Dunzhou, there are usually field officials who would go forth to handle the military garrison's cases. Kong Ling sat in his chair and said, "He has assembled this many people in just half a year, and to think we never got wind of it." "Your lordship," Zhou Gui said earnestly, "I originally thought that Lei Changming has merely 10,000 men or so, and besieging him to annihilate him would be merely a matter of a month or so. But now, He's charging towards Tsizhou with 40,000 troops, and we only have 20,000 men from the imperial army. I fear we are in a perilous position. Why not get someone to head for Libei immediately to pass the news to Xiao Fangxiu and have him deploy the Libei armored cavalry troops guarding the northeast provisions bridle path south to provide reinforcements. Xiao Qia finished securing his armed guards, yet he did not speak. Zhou Gui still wanted to persuade him, but Kong Ling sensed something else from Xiao Qia's silence. Taking advantage of his action as he served tea, he pressed down Zhou Gui's arm, and Zhou Gui promptly swallowed back his words. There's no need for your excellency and Mr. Qingfeng to panic. Shun Zichuan sat on another chair. He was still looking at that courier report. Lei Changming's 40,000 men have to eat too. He can't travel fast, and his logistics squad needs to carry along sufficient rations in order to sustain them as they stride across hundreds and thousands of li to Tsizhou to fight a battle with us. Besides, a peculiar expression materialized on Shen Zichuan's face. This report might not be accurate either. Why does the vice commander say so? Zhou Gui hurriedly lifted the hem of his robe and approached him to look at the courier report as well. This is an urgent report sent back personally by the official who went to Dunzhou to handle the bandit case. How can it be inaccurate? He didn't see Lei Changming 40,000 soldiers and horses with his own eyes. Shun Zichuan mulled it over. It's too hasty and sloppy to believe Lei Changming's words based on just the traces of earthen stoves. I suspect Lei Changming already knows that the imperial army has arrived in Tsizhou. That's why he put up the banner of 40,000 men, to throw us into disarray. That's right. With his eyes lowered, Xiao Qia said. If he really has 40,000 people, the battle would be a lot easier to fight. A war of attrition depletes way too much resources. He would be in more of a dire strait than us. But he still has the support of the Yan clan of Hezhou. Zhou Gui said anxiously. It was all because of the Yan clan's financial assistance that he was able to expand to such a scale. There is a river course in Hezhou that leads right to the granary in Jueshi. It's easy to supply him with additional rations. How muddle-headed your excellency is. Shun Zichuan suddenly laughed. If Lei Changming still has the Yan clan's full support behind him, then why would he be in such a hurry to rush to Tsizhou? Have you forgotten that his purpose in coming to Tsizhou is to get his hands on the grains? He came once before the new year, and came visiting again a few months later. Xiao Qia said. This not only indicates that he might have fallen out with the Yan clan, but also that his assets back at Mount Luo are no longer enough to fill his tummy. It's the Chaosha River to his east, and the Biancha cavalry is even better at plundering than he is. He has no one to turn to, so he could only come repeatedly to Tsizhou to demand grains. Then why did he have to wait until the imperial army arrived at Tsizhou to make another trip instead of coming here earlier or later? Kong Ling circled around the table, slowed down for 2 steps, and said, Your lordship's arrival in Tsizhou is clearly disadvantageous to him. Because Han Jin is in the imperial army's hands. Shun Zichuan closed the report and stood up. He said, It's all because of the Yan clan's help that he can survive this long. Now that he has parted ways with the Yan clan, he will have to seek new help if he wants to continue holding on to his mountain stronghold and keep on being his overlord. He's a bandit. The more people he has under his command, the more troublesome it will be. Those living on the other mountains can live off the mountain, but Zhongbua is poor and barren. Even if he digs out the entire mountain, all he can eat is soil. This person is very good at grabbing opportunities. He's able to gain fame and fortune because he made the right choices at the 3 turning points in his life. He has soldiers, and Zhongbua just happens to be short of soldiers. However, he has no connections, and Sun just happens to lead the imperial army here to pass through Tsizhou. If he is able to defeat the imperial army and save Han Jin, then he would be able to report this meritorious service of his to Kudu and seek a military official position in Zhongbua through the Han clan. A good plan indeed, to have his eyes set on metamorphosing into a real official of the imperial court. Indignant, Zhou stomped his foot and said, "Is he totally showing no regards for the commoners of Cizhou? This is merely just a conjecture. We still have to trade blows with this person before we can get a better feel of him." Xiao Qie hung up Longli blade and said to Zhou Gui, "Li Bei lies behind Cizhou. If Lei Changming can't sneak through Cizhou and go around the back, then he won't be able to surround the city and trap us. Your Excellency can then immediately get people to seal the city gate. Even the dog holes have to be filled up and sealed. Those under his command are all a motley crew not registered in the household registers. They will not be able to guard against this. By this, is your lordship going to fortify the city and face them off in a confrontation?" Kong Ling looked to be in a spot. "Cizhou's city walls are old. I'm afraid they won't be able to withstand Lei Changming's assault. The Imperial Army can't enter the city and defend to the death." Xiao Qie held his sword and slightly bared his teeth. "I'll make a bet with you. Lei Changming will definitely not dare to charge head-on at my soldiers. This is what he fears." At dusk, Xiao Qie and Xin Zichuan made an inspection tour of the city walls. Both men brought their blades with them and walked side by side atop the city wall. This city wall was last repaired during the reign of Yongyi. Xin Zichuan attempted to push at the battlement of the wall, and earthen clay that had been eroded by the wind and rain tumbled to the ground. That's because Zhou Gui is poor. He's been urgently trying to resolve the issue of food these few years. Naturally, he would be too preoccupied to pay any attention to the city's military defense. Xiao Qie picked up a chunk of earth and rubbed it into pieces in his hand. The Imperial Army can stand before Cizhou to defend it, but it cannot retreat into the city. Xiao Qie was well aware that Zhou Gui wanted to seek assistance from Li Bei, but he was unwilling to ask for help. He could return to Li Bei soon, but the arrangements for these 20,000 Imperial Army men he had brought with him were something he had yet to discuss with his father and eldest brother. He understood the Li Bei armored cavalry. Such a complete army like that would be unable to come to a swift acceptance of the Imperial Army. These two armies would predictably have to go through a very difficult bonding process for them to learn to get along with one another. If he opened his mouth at this time to ask for help and Xiao Fengshu came, then Xiao Qie would never have the chance to shine again when he returned to Li Bei. This battle was his first battle on returning home. He had to win it. He had to win it on his own. The sunset clouds on the horizon spread out and tinted half of the sky red. Rows upon rows of houses with curling smoke lined the city amidst the clamorous buzz of human voices. Xin Zichuan lowered his hand to cover the center of Xiao Qie's head. Both men, one standing and one squatting, looked at the scene beneath them. Lei Changming can be considered a capable man, Xin Zichuan said. But you are the one who decides whether he is a bandit or an ambitious man. Ambitious men are born out of troubled times. Xiao Qie put his arms on his knees and propped himself up. I'll take the conqueror's bow with me. He stood here, like a lush tree bathed in the dimming light of dusk, like a mountain standing tall before the city wall. Xin Zichuan watched those shackles gradually vanish. Poised and ready for action, it was time for Xiao Qie to show his real mettle in this chaotic situation. When you return to Li Bei, Xin Zichuan gazed at him. His lordship will realize that you've grown taller again. I was already taller than him the last time I saw him. Xiao Qie smiled. As a child, I thought my father was like a towering tree. He put me on his shoulder and lied to me that I'd be able to touch the clouds. My eldest brother wanted to sit on my father's shoulder too, but he was already old enough to attend school then, and he felt that he had to maintain his dignity as the older brother, so he never said a word to my father and would be happy just to watch me sit. Xin Zichuan smiled too. He gazed back at the sky and said, They all said that the hereditary prince looks like the princess consort of Li Bei. Somewhat, I guess. Xiao Qie's eyes reflected the entire sky of rose-tinted clouds. Not as much as I resemble my father. Actually, my eldest brother was once miserable. When my father retired back sick to the prince's residence, my eldest brother was only in his teens. All of a sudden, he had to fight a way out from those ferocious men. Tough. Initially, he was mocked the most for being unlike father. He did not have a sufficiently strong and well-built physique. He once said to Zhao Hui, the side of Xiao Qia's face was calm and serene. He seemed to recall that day, but then a certain wave of sadness inexplicably washed over him. He turned his head and took Shen Zichuan's hands. His Adam's apple bobbed a few times before he said, "Us brothers are truly strange. I envy my eldest brother's steadiness, and I also envy his composure. I used to think, if only I had been born a few years earlier, then I would be the eldest brother, the hereditary prince. I would have been able to go galloping to my heart's content. I wouldn't have to leave Libei a single step. But one day, he came home wounded and saw me in the courtyard shooting arrows. And he said to Zhao Hui, 'I really envy you. I thought my father and eldest brother would never feel pain and would never fall. They would shed blood and never tears. But on the day my eldest brother got married, he drank himself drunk. Yet, such a steady person like that gingerly took my eldest sister-in-law's hands and got all teary-eyed at her. It was as if he had already anticipated the future. He saw her as his precious treasure. He would feel fear too. There is nothing about me that is better than my eldest brother. If I had to say, then it'd be that I've totally inherited this fine physique from my father." Xiao Qia gripped Shen Zichuan tightly. "I never really understood in the past why he had to get all teary-eyed at my eldest sister-in-law. But now I do." Chapter 105. Cunning. Chapter 105. Cunning. Lei Changming arrived at the mountainous area 100 li away from Cizhou. It started to drizzle. He did not act rashly and march his troop on. Instead, he occupied the area to take a break and started to set up camp. They meant to fight a protracted battle. Tantai who crouched in the grass and looked down. He drags out the troops in such a long line that it's impossible to tell how many soldiers and horses there are. But their stoves are so densely clustered together that it makes me afraid just to look at it. Ding Tao drew a circle at the spot where Lei Changming stationed his troop. I went to the towns along the way to probe for information. All of them said he indeed brought more than 40,000 men this time. They took in all the bandits near this part of Cizhou on their way here. It's by mixing falsehood with truth that would make it impossible for others to distinguish between truth from lies. Xiao Qia rose and brushed aside the branch of leaves with water droplets on it. If he really has that many people, why would he still need to recruit deserters and traitors? An army that's about to fight a battle fears last-minute addition of soldiers the most. That will forcibly throw the long-standing rapport between the soldiers into disarray, thereby turning a ferocious army into a motley crew. That's what I surmise too. Tantai who followed Xiao Qia out of the forest. The more he wants others to know he has 40,000 men, the more he has a guilty conscience. "Master, he's afraid of us." Xiao Qia took off his cloak in the drizzle and tossed it to Ding Tao behind him. As he hung up his blade, he looked at Tantai Hu and said, "If he's afraid, he wouldn't have come. By doing this, he's seizing the opportunity to intimidate us. He saw that we were from Kudu and wanted to scare us." A battle did not break out at the Nanlin hunting grounds because Qi Yuan led the Qidong garrison troops to suppress the rebellion. On the surface, it looked like it had nothing to do with Xiao Qia. The 8 great training divisions used to belittle the seemingly obsolete Imperial Army in the past back in Kudu. Although the Imperial Army had taken over Kudu's patrols these few years, the substitution was due to a change of hands in authority. They never fought a decent battle, and so they, along with Xiao Qia, were deemed by Lei Changming to be lads who were still wet behind the ears. His underestimating of the enemy is to our advantage. But if we follow suit and underestimate him too, then we deserve to be beaten. Lei Changming is no ordinary man. He must have his own strengths to be able to dominate the southeast of Zhongbua. Xiao Qie flipped atop the horse, lifted the reins, and said, Tantai Hu, 6 years ago, you escaped from Dengzhou to Kudu, and now we have returned. Let me ask you, do you still remember what I said when you led your troops to register and join the Imperial Army? The rain dropped into Tantai Hu's eyes. He looked up at Xiao Qie and said, This humble subordinate would not dare to forget for even a moment. Master said that the humiliation of our nation has yet to be redressed, and the feuds of our families have yet to be avenged. That's right. Xiao Qie reined in the horse and lifted his eyes to look at the dense cluster of heads in the rain. He said in a quiet voice, The people from Bianxia carried out massacres in several cities of Zhongbua. Libei armored cavalry and Qidong garrison troops fought them off, but was this enmity avenged? To the Bianxia cavalry, this was merely just them riding their horses to and fro for amusement. What was that circulating around in Kudu? They said they'd rather be a dog than a man of Zhongbua. So how can we now just hand over the humiliation Zhongbua suffered under those slaughter blades to others to redress it for us? We gallop all night without stopping in our dreams, and now, Lei Changming is the obstacle that stands in our way. The opportunity to battle with the Bianxia cavalry is right before our eyes. Do we lose? Victory and defeat were commonplace in the military, but no army would be willing to keep losing forever. In the past 6 years, they have transformed from a motley crew lacking in cohesion and organization into a well-trained and combat-ready army. The Imperial Army was just like Xiao Qie's silhouette, buried among the golden sand as tens of thousands of worthless bugs in the crevices of Dazhou's mighty army. Never mind how the others described them as in the past. Never mind if they were slapped with the label of a good-for-nothing. They were finally about to reveal their true mettle from the gravel. A sudden gust of strong wind blew the banner open. Tantai Hu pursed his lips tightly and said, We must win. The sound of rain swiftly grew urgent. Tantai Hu wiped his eyes roughly and said in a hoarse voice as the shouts behind him gradually became a wave, We must win. We must win. From this time on to the moment they battled to the death, We must win had to become the Imperial Army's one and only creed. Faced up against their senior who had made a name for himself a long time ago, they had to draw their blades, they had to spur their horses on swiftly in an advance, and they had to defeat everyone standing in their way, one at a time. They could only win. The Libei armored cavalry could lose, as could the Qidong garrison troops. Even Lei Changming's forces could suffer a defeat. But the Imperial Army and Xiao Qie could not. At the same time they broke free of their shackles, they also left their backer. If they could not win, then they could only die. Xiao Qie turned his horse around and wiped away the rainwater on his chin. It was as if he was a wolf who had caught a whiff of blood and meat. He drew out that blade which symbolized avarice and ruthlessness and said to the wolf pack behind him, Time for us to eat. The rain pitter-pattered down and broke up the water surface. Lei Changming heard that the special envoy from Cizhou had arrived, so he received him in the tent. Mr. Tringfeng. With a cloak around him, Lei Changming sat on the raised tiger seat and scrutinized Kong Ling. It has been quite some days since we last met. Kong Ling bowed in greeting and said, The chief often comes to our Cizhou in the past. We're all old acquaintances, so why take up arms and create such a big stir this time? Surprisingly enough, Lei Changming was not a boorish fellow. There were no ornaments adorning his scarred arms, and his clothes were simple and plain. The broadsword he carried with him had already been polished until there were visible marks. If one were to suddenly look over, he was no different from the peasant commoners of Zhongbua who always had their face to the ground and back to the sky. He never studied before. He had the aura of a bandit who bumbled his way around the martial fraternity all year round. But that seemed to be only a disguise, for he was quite perceptive. Lei Changming did not feign civility with Kong Ling. He next fixed his eyes on Shun Zichuan and said with a grin, Since we are old acquaintances, why did Mr. Tringfong bring along an imperial bodyguard when it's just for a drink? With a composed expression, Kong Ling said, "Didn't the chief bring such a large number of troops to put pressure on the city all to see his lordship and vice-commander Shen? Today, I'll be so bold as to mutually recommend both of you to each other. Your Excellency the vice-commander, this is Chief Lei Changming, whose name is renowned in the 6 prefectures of Zhonghua. He's the one of highest power in the 2 prefectures of Dunzhou and Dunzhou. Chief, this is Vice-Commander Shen Zichuan, an official in the Son of Heaven's inner ministerial circle, whom Kudu personally made an exception to promote. I've heard much of your great name," Lei Changming said, as if he was a little interested. "Shen Zichuan. You're Shen Zichuan. I heard Han Cheng devised a scheme to seal the city and besiege you. You alone killed his remaining elite troop. Every strike of yours was lethal, and each blow was so fast it was hardly visible. Why are you hanging out with Zhou Gui and the others instead of following Xiao Qie to Libei? Such a law-abiding prefectural prefect like him can't accommodate a killing machine like you, can he? I'm also a law-abiding person." Shen Zichuan lifted his right hand slightly to reveal the side of his waist. "I didn't even bring my blade along to see you, Chief Lei." Lei Changming raised his hand to wave back the guards who were pressing in because of Shen Zichuan's movements. He pointed at Shen Zichuan and said, "You don't even remove your blade when you see the Son of Heaven. Yet you do it wholeheartedly on seeing me." He laughed out loud in a booming voice and said loudly, "Could it be that I'm even more honorable than the Son of Heaven? The Empress Dowager is in charge now, and court discipline is lax. There has long been no such thing as the Son of Heaven." Shen Zichuan smiled. "The chief is a peerless hero. I naturally have to observe the etiquette. You are all people who have been in Kudu for a long time. Your words are all pleasing to the ears." Lei Changming leaned against his seat and pried apart the sweet potato on the plate. He took 2 bites and said, "Spit it out. What do you want with me? My purpose for coming to the chief's tent today is to, firstly, pay you a special visit, and secondly, express my willingness to discuss with you about the future." Shen Zichuan scrutinized the tent as he spoke. Pitching camp here is, after all, not a long-term measure. If the imperial army doesn't come, then is the chief going to keep waiting day after day? You understand Xiao Qie better than me. Lei Changming finished his sweet potato in a few bites. His father and eldest brother are all renowned generals. How bad can he be? I'll wait for him to come to me for a discussion. Sizhou is only just this big. I can guess where he is hiding even without searching. I can't enter Sizhou if he occupies Sizhou and refuses to leave. There has to be a resolution to this matter, right? I'll wait for him. I'm in no hurry. His 20,000 imperial army are skilled in horsemanship and archery. Their capabilities on horseback are no less inferior to the Libei armored cavalry. Fighting with him now would be detrimental to the chief instead. Seeing those guards about to move again, Shen Zichuan let out a preemptive smile and said, "He is in the city, and has Sizhou granary for sustenance. The chief is outside the city, and can only rely on army rations from the back end to sustain the forces. The expenditure of 40,000 men is an appalling amount. The longer this battle drags on, the more the chief will lose out. I'm sure the chief understands this more than me. So what? I can afford to dawdle. But the imperial army can't, right? Xiao Qie can't live on Sizhou's grains for an entire lifetime. The Prince of Libei is still fighting a war in Libei. Xiao Qie is in a hurry to go home. I'll only stand to lose money the longer this drags on, but it's lives that hang in the balance for Xiao Qie. He rebelled, but Qidong garrison troops didn't. Qi Juin only needs half a month to lead her troops here. When the Libei armored cavalry comes forth to provide reinforcement, then, they will have a headache on both ends. Qi Juin is not easier to fight than the Bianxia cavalry. This lass's capability is something you people who have had frequent dealings with her know best. She even dared to set the Biancha's throne on fire. It's simply too easy for her to fight against one Xizhou. But, does Shao Qia dare to? Lei Changming wiped his mouth. His smile was casual, and the expression in his eyes was cool and collected. Is Shao Qia even worthy? Shun Zichuan revealed a regretful expression and said, if the reserve rations the chief has is truly adequate, then there's no need for me to say a word more about it. Truth be told, it's precisely because I'm worried about Commander-in-Chief Qi's arrival any time now that I thought of discussing a deal with you. Kong Lin turned slightly pale and walked 2 steps closer toward Shin Zichuan. He said, Vice Commander, we have yet to. What deal do you want to discuss with me? Lei Changming interrupted Kong Ling. Shin Zichuan said, if Shao Qia is able to pass through Xizhou without a hitch, then it's all good and well for everyone. But since the chief has come forth with your own soldiers, then that 20,000 imperial army of his is no longer my only choice. The deal I wish to discuss with the chief is precisely regarding the army rations. I still have 2 million silver in my hands, and I'm willing to invest it in the chief to be used for food rations expenditure this battle. But in exchange, you have to vouch for me before Han Qing to preserve my life, when you become an official in the imperial court in the future. Stunned, Kong Lin said, Shin Zichuan, how can you dupe us? Didn't we agree that those 2 million will be given to Xizhou to rebuild the garrison troops? I only said I was willing to. Shin Zichuan tilted his head a little and said to Kong Ling with sincerity, I didn't say I definitely would. Kong Ling grabbed hold of Shin Zichuan's sleeve and said, you lied to us? You treacherous lad. Lei Changming laughed again. With his hands on his knees, he said, are you for real? Shin Zichuan, if you really have that much silver, would you still have let the imperial army gnaw on mud the entire way while fleeing for their lives? You people are not plotting to deceive me, are you? How was Kong Ling still of the mind to listen to what he was saying? His face flushed red, and his goatee trembled as he said to Shin Zichuan in disbelief, was that impassioned speech of yours a lie too? You used Zhongguo's calamity to lie to us and lay a trap. Are you still human? Every man has his own ambition. Shin Zichuan smiled lazily. Xizhou and the imperial army are already cornered like turtles in a jar. It's natural for me to seek a new master. Mr. Tringfeng, you of all people should understand it best. If you can really produce 2 million silver, still sitting in place, Lei Changming said, and help me to save Han Jin, then I'll take care of it on Han Cheng's end for you. I've already gotten someone to bring some silver over. Shin Zichuan said. So is this proof enough of my sincerity, Chief?